Imagine being a prince, but your own soldiers treat you like a stray dog. Commander Pable laughs right in his face, publicly humiliating him and calling him a rat in front of the entire platoon. Everyone expects the weak, pathetic prince to lower his head, apologize, and scurry away like he always does. But instead, the air violently freezes. The prince's eyes glow a demonic red. He steps forward, and suddenly, this arrogant, high-ranking knight is choking on his own breath. The prince doesn't yell. He just coldly demands, "What is your duty?" Pable is suddenly sweating bullets, his entire body trembling under a suffocating, murderous intent that feels like a mountain crushing his chest. To prove a point, the prince doesn't even draw a blade. He casually snaps a dead branch off a tree. The veteran knight braces himself, but it's useless. With a literal twig, the prince unleashes a strike so terrifyingly heavy that the commander actually sees his own death flash before his eyes. The clash shatters the ground. The knight is left completely paralyzed, disarmed by a piece of wood. The prince drops the stick and smirks, "I'm quite disappointed. How did a bullied coward suddenly awaken the aura of an absolute war monarch?" Because the soul inside that frail body was forged in a literal apocalypse. Hell isn't a myth found in old books, it's a landscape painted in charcoal, ash, and the blood of the innocent. The sky is choked with the black smoke of a dying world, and the ground is nothing more than a graveyard of smoldering embers. A single hand, caked in grime and gore, reaches out from the ruins as if trying to pull the very heavens down into the dirt. The realization hits with the weight of a mountain. This isn't just a battlefield, it's a funeral pyre for an entire civilization. If there is a hell, it would be this place. And in the center of this inferno, a king is taking his final, ragged breath. Burin Sakrisha lies broken on the scorched earth, his body transformed into a pincushion for enemy arrows. Each shaft buried in his flesh is a testament to a struggle that has finally reached its limit. Beside him, Kiri trembles, his own strength failing as he looks upon the ruin of his sovereign. Burin's lungs rattle with the sound of liquid death as he coughs up thick, dark blood that stains his chin and the dirt beneath him. He tries to speak, but the words are strangled by the iron grip of mortality. Kiri can only whisper in horror, "Why, your highness? Be Burin." As the light begins to fade from the king's eyes, the silence of the dead is the only response they receive. Kiri pulls the dying king closer, his hands slick with the lifeblood of Sakrisha. He knows the end is here, yet he clings to the wreckage of his duty with a desperation that defies logic. This is all I can do. He stammers, his voice cracking under the weight of his failure. He offers his own life, his own soul, as a final shield for a man who is already halfway to the grave. But if I can repay you, with at least this. He doesn't finish the thought, but the intent is clear, a final act of loyalty in a world that has abandoned all honor. But the shadows don't allow for a peaceful passing. A voice cuts through the haze of pain, sharp and demanding. "Get it together, please, Kir, lift your sword again." It's a command that pulls Kiri back from the brink of total collapse. He reaches out, his fingers trembling as they find the hilt of an ornate, jewel-encrusted blade. The steel hums with a power that feels out of place in this graveyard. "Don't stop," the voice urges. The grip tightens. The king's will is a stubborn thing, refusing to be extinguished even as the world around him turns to cinders. Outside this small circle of grief, the chaos of war continues its relentless march. War horses gallop through the flames, their riders silhouetted against the orange glow of destruction. This wasn't a war fought for borders or ideology. It was a war of pure, unadulterated greed. Kairos, a nation forged by the uneasy alliance of dragons and humans, had set its sights on a treasure they had no right to claim. They demanded the axis of time, the sacred relic of Sakrisha, and when the proposal was rejected, they chose to erase the homeland from the map. Now, the price of that rejection is being paid in souls. Burin Sakrisha, the king who refused to bow, stands once more. He is a vision of terror, a man who has become more ghost than human. He slashes through the enemy horde with a ferocity that borders on madness. Blood sprays across the battlefield as he carves a path through those who sought to plunder his home. He loses an arm to the fray, the limb severed in a spray of crimson, but he doesn't even flinch. Pain is a luxury he can no longer afford. This was the beginning of his homeland's last war, and he intends to be its final, most bitter chapter. He is Burin Sakrisha, the king of a nation that no longer exists, and he is far from finished. But even a king who fights like a demon cannot hold back the tide of magic forever. The Kairos Magician Corps, known as Valkan, begins to close the circle. Burin stands alone, the last man standing in a sea of enemies. Massive geometric crests ignite in the air around him, glowing with a lethal, arcane light. He can feel the temperature rising, the very oxygen being sucked out of the air by the spells being woven against him. He knows it's already too late. He can feel death nearing, its cold fingers brushing against his heart. But he refuses to let his footsteps be halted by something as trivial as his own demise. "I can't let something like this stop my footsteps," he growls, his voice a low rumble of defiance. Above him, a massive fireball, a literal meteor of magical destruction, begins its descent. It's an attack designed to incinerate everything in its path, to leave nothing but a glass crater where a king once stood. Burin doesn't run. He doesn't hide. He raises his blade, the light of the falling star reflecting in his wide, manic eyes. The blade of Secretia, he roars, pouring every remaining drop of his life force into a single, impossible strike. The collision is a blinding whiteout, a roar of sound that swallows the screams of the dying. When the smoke finally begins to clear, the landscape is unrecognizable. The crazy king, Planche of Kairos, has succeeded in his goal. He has turned a motherland into a literal hell. He is the architect of this misery, the man who started it all for the sake of a relic he couldn't understand. But amidst the ruins, a new figure emerges. Arsene, the commander of the Valkan Corps, walks through the ash with a calm that is more terrifying than the fire. He approaches the fallen king, his face masked, his eyes cold. "Nice to meet you," he says, as if they were meeting at a garden party rather than a massacre. "I am the commander of Valkan, Arsene. What is your name?" Burin looks up, his mind a fractured mirror of his broken body. "I've forgotten it all," he whispers. He is no longer a king, he is just a blade that serves a dead throne. They stand on the edge of a cliff, the world falling away into an abyss of fire and magic. Arsene begins to weave a final spell, ice crystals forming in the heated air as a ripple begins to distort reality itself. "I will remember you," Arsene promises, a final insult to a man who has lost everything. King of Secretia. As the magic takes hold, a single drop of water, perhaps a tear, perhaps a condensation of the spell, falls into the void. It hits an invisible surface, creating a ripple that expands outward, defying the laws of physics. In that final, fleeting moment of consciousness, Burin sees it. The end isn't a wall, it's a door. A single drop of water falls into a dark abyss, sending ripples through a void of shattered memories. This is the sum of a life lived in service to a crown that no longer exists. The images of a peaceful past, of students laughing in the sun and fields of green, are nothing more than ghosts now, swallowed by the encroaching shadows. The fall of a motherland is a heavy burden to carry into the afterlife, and as the last flicker of light vanishes, the darkness becomes absolute. But death is rarely as simple as it seems. The silence is broken by the sharp, rhythmic chime of a bell. Sunlight, warm and intrusive, spills through a window, cutting through the fog of a mind that should be dead. A young attendant leans over the bed, her expression a mix of duty and concern. She urges the sleeper to wake, calling him Prince and asking if his dreams were sweet. It's a cruel joke. The man in the bed bolts upright, his breath hitching as he stares at a hand that shouldn't be there. He remembers the cold steel, the spray of blood, and the agonizing sensation of his arm being severed from his body. He gasps out a name, Planche, the monster responsible for his ruin. But as he grips his own wrist, he finds skin that is whole, unscarred, and warm. The attendants recoil in genuine horror. They don't see a warrior king, they see a fragile prince speaking of mutilation and madness. They whisper among themselves, wondering if a simple nightmare could have broken his spirit so completely. To them, his arm is perfectly fine, but to the man inhabiting this body, it is a miracle he cannot comprehend. He stares at the strangers in the room, his mind racing. He knows the name Planche. He hates it to his very marrow, but the face reflecting in his mind is a silhouette of pure malice, a man with eyes that glow with the fire of conquest. He looks at his hands again, realizing they are smaller, softer. He isn't in Secretia. He isn't Burin anymore. He looks at the lead attendant, Yen, and asks the only question that matters: who am I? The answer is a death sentence in its own right. You are Kalian Rain Kairos, Yen replies, the third prince of Kairos. The revelation hits with the force of a physical blow. He hasn't just survived. He has been reborn into the heart of the enemy. He looks into a mirror and sees a stranger with raven black hair and eyes the color of fresh blood. This is a horrific nightmare, one where the victim is forced to wear the skin of his executioner. The title of his new life is written in the stars: How to Live as the Enemy Prince. He repeats the name Kalian, tasting the bitterness of it. He is in Kairos, the empire that demanded the axis of time and used that greed as an excuse to erase his home from the map. He demands to know the date, his voice trembling with a desperate need for orientation. It is April 28th, year 522. The realization settles in his gut like lead. He has been thrown back an entire decade. He is standing in the calm before the storm, years before the last war would turn the world to ash. He remembers how it started, the axis of time, a golden, celestial relic that appeared in the royal palace of Secretia. It was an object of impossible power, rumored to be able to turn back the clock, and Kairos, the ruler of the continent, coveted it above all else. When Secretia rejected their demands, the empire didn't negotiate. They simply went to war as if they had been waiting for the excuse. The memory shifts to a darkened room, smelling of blood and ozone. He sees Chase, his brother, his Hyungnim, weeping over a broken body. Chase holds the relic, his hands glowing with a desperate, forbidden magic. Burin, don't, he sobs, refusing to let go even as the world falls apart. Burin's final wish was a simple one: to go back to a time before that horrible object ever appeared, to a time when his family was whole and his land was safe. It seems the axis of time listened. Back in the present, Colleen stands by the window, looking out over the sprawling, opulent gardens of the Kairos Palace. The irony is staggering. To save his people, he must now live as the son of the man who would eventually kill them. He watches the sunlight dance on a dragon-shaped fountain, a symbol of the Empire's might. He isn't a king anymore, and he isn't a hero. He is a spy in his own skin, a ghost inhabiting a prince. But he won't waste this second chance. If the heavens gave him this opportunity, he will take it, no matter how much he hates the blood running through his new veins. The attendants call for him again, reminding him that the breakfast gathering cannot be delayed any longer. It is his first test, his first step into a den of vipers. He takes a breath, steadying his hands. He will play the part. He will wear the silks of Kairos and smile at his enemies. He will survive as a prince of Kairos, and from within these walls, he will ensure that the future he remembers never comes to pass. The door creaks open. The heavy, ornate doors of the royal dining hall creak open with a slow, deliberate groan, the sound echoing through the silent corridor like a warning. A herald's voice rings out, sharp and formal, announcing that Colleen, the third prince, shall have his meal now. Colleen steps forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor as he enters a room that feels more like a prison than a palace. He is accompanied by his lead attendant, Yen, whose face is a mask of professional worry. This isn't just breakfast, it's a daily ritual of humiliation, and Colleen knows he has to play the part of the fragile, unwanted prince perfectly if he wants to survive the morning. But as he approaches the table, he realizes he isn't the only one who showed up to play. Sitting at the long, mahogany table is a man who looks like he was sculpted from ice and indifference, Randall Sale Kairos, the first prince. He is the picture of royal perfection, his blonde hair catching the morning light as he sips from a delicate, gold-rimmed teacup. He doesn't even look up as Colleen enters. These three princes are half-brothers, a fractured family tree rooted in the bloodline of the holy state of Tencel. By the king's strict orders, breakfast is prepared for all three every single morning, a forced display of unity that everyone in the room knows is a lie. Colleen stops and offers a shallow bow, his voice steady as he says, "I apologize for my tardiness." He waits for a response, a greeting, or even a scolding, but Randall continues to drink his tea in absolute silence. It's a masterclass in being ignored. To Randall, Colleen isn't a brother or even a rival, he's just a smudge on the scenery. Colleen feels the weight of that silence, a cold reminder that in this palace, he is less than a ghost. It feels like trash to be treated this way, but he swallows his pride along with the stale air of the room. He begins to wonder if he's the only sibling who actually bothered to show up on time, but the thought is cut short by a violent, echoing bang. The doors at the far end of the hall don't just open, they are kicked wide with enough force to rattle the silverware. A new figure prowls into the room, radiating a level of pure, unadulterated arrogance that makes the air turn sour. This is Planche, the second prince, and he looks like he just rolled out of a tavern after a week-long bender. His shirt is half unbuttoned, exposing his chest, and his hair is a chaotic mess that mocks the formal setting of the room. The servants recoil in a mix of fear and disgust, but Planche doesn't care. He walks with the heavy, rhythmic stride of a man who owns everything he sees. Colleen freezes, his breath hitching in his throat as he stares at the newcomer. To the rest of the world, this is just a rebellious prince, but to the soul inhabiting Callion's body, this is the face of the apocalypse. This is the Mad King, Planche, the monster who, in the timeline Colleen remembers, will eventually tear his motherland to bloody pieces. Seeing his future executioner walking around in a silk robe is a psychological gut punch that nearly breaks his composure. Planche slumps into his chair with a heavy thud, his eyes glazed with a predatory boredom. He doesn't offer an apology or a greeting, he just exists, a black hole of charisma and malice. Colleen watches him, his mind racing through the political landscape of this era. Planche is untouchable because the current queen of Kairos is his biological mother, giving him a level of protection that borders on divine right. He can walk around half-naked and insult his brothers because he knows no one in this palace would dare to defy her authority. He is a wolf in a room full of sheep, and he knows it. Planche leans back, his gaze finally landing on Colleen with a sneer that feels like a physical stain. He doesn't see a brother, he sees a nuisance. Colleen tries to focus on his own tea, but his hands are shaking with a rage so intense it threatens to boil over. He remembers the smell of smoke, the sound of screaming, and the sight of Planche standing over the ruins of Secretia. Then, Planche speaks, his voice dripping with a casual, cutting cruelty. He looks at Colleen and scoffs, saying there isn't a drop of decency in him and that he takes after his mother. It's a calculated strike, a direct insult to Callion's dead mother and his low status. The rage in Callion's chest flares white-hot, a roar of "slit that throat right this instant," screaming in the back of his mind. His vision tunnels, focusing on the pulse jumping in Planche's neck. He could do it. He could end the Mad King before he ever wears a crown. But then, the memory of his brother Chase flickers in his mind, the tears, the sacrifice, and the desperate magic that sent him back 10 years. He cannot let that chance go to waste. He must endure. He forces his fingers to loosen their grip on the porcelain, his knuckles white as he pushes the murderous impulse back into the dark. He tells himself to stay calm, to be the weak prince a little longer, even as his soul demands blood. Planche, sensing the tension but misreading it as fear, lets out a sharp, mocking laugh. Suddenly, a sharp crack shatters the silence as a cup is slammed onto the table with enough force to splinter the wood. Planche stands up, his chair screeching against the floor like a dying animal. Enough, he growls, his eyes flashing with a sudden, irrational anger. He looks at Colleen with a look of pure loathing, declaring that he's lost his appetite because of those disgusting blood-colored eyes. It's a final, parting insult meant to remind Colleen that he is a freak, a monster in the eyes of the true royalty. Planche turns on his heel and storms out of the hall, his footsteps thudding like a drumbeat of war. Colleen is left sitting in the wreckage of the meal, the spilled tea soaking into the tablecloth like a spreading wound. He stares at the empty doorway, his mind reeling. Is Planche really trying to say this entire situation is Callion's fault? The narcissism is almost impressive. He was the one who broke the peace, yet he acts like Callion's mere existence is an assault on his senses. In the heavy silence that follows, a chair lies overturned on the carpet, a symbol of the broken family sitting at the table. Suddenly, Yen is there, kneeling by Callion's side with a look of genuine terror and devotion. He frantically checks Callion's shoes, wiping away the splattered tea as if it were poison. "Your Highness, are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" he whispers, his voice trembling. Colleen looks down at the boy, the only person in this den of vipers who actually cares if he lives or dies. He realizes that despite the lowly treatment he receives every day, he at least has one loyal servant who treats his prince's body as more important than his own. Colleen reaches out, his hand steady now, and says, "Yen, thanks for caring about me." The attendant freezes, his eyes wide with shock. Normally, the old Colleen would have just silently cried, hiding his face in shame. But this Colleen, the man who was once a king, just offers a small, chillingly calm smile. Colleen stands in the light, a faint, knowing smirk playing on his lips that feels entirely out of place for the boy he used to be. The air around him seems to shift as the question hangs in the silence. Why is he smiling? To understand that, you have to understand the blood flowing through his veins, a lineage tied to the very foundation of the Kairos kingdom. Long ago, the first queen was not merely a woman, but the dragon Sisphanian, a creature of myth and absolute power. She was a vision of terror and beauty, possessing hair as dark as a moonless night and eyes that burned with the intensity of sacred flames. Among all the princes of the current generation, Colleen was the only one to inherit these striking exterior traits, carrying the physical mark of a dragon's legacy. But in his past life, those traits were a curse rather than a gift because the power he possessed was utterly pitiful. He was a shell of a prince, trembling in the shadows of his own reflection, his face slick with the sweat of constant, soul-crushing fear. He spent every waking moment trying to hide those vibrant red eyes, treating his royal heritage like a shameful deformity. The reason for this obsession was simple and cruel: Prince Planche hated them. To Planche, those eyes weren't a sign of ancient draconic blood, they were a provocation, leading him to mock Colleen by calling them disgusting, blood-colored eyes. Looking back through these inherited memories, the soul now inhabiting Callion's body feels a wave of genuine unpleasantness. It's like peeking into a diary of a coward, watching a version of himself hide from a bully like Planche as if his life depended on staying invisible. He looks at his hands and scoffs internally, thinking that the original Colleen was a complete and total idiot for letting himself be trampled so easily. Confidence is loud, but the silence of a man who has already died once is much louder. Yen, his ever-faithful attendant, notices the sudden change in his master's demeanor and asks if something is wrong or if there's a specific task he needs to perform. Colleen simply turns away, his voice cold and steady as he suggests they head back now. Yen follows, his mind racing with confusion, wondering if the prince is acting strange because he stayed up too late reading some heroic night novel. They walk past the towering stone statues of dragons that guard the palace, silent reminders of a power Colleen is finally ready to claim. The political reality of this world is a death trap. The third prince was born to a concubine of peasant roots, leaving him with zero status and even less support. He was a weak individual in a den of vipers, lacking even the basic strength required to protect his own life. As he strides through the palace gardens, the weight of the timeline presses down on him. He is currently standing in the brief window of time right before his coming-of-age ceremony, a moment that should be a celebration but is actually a countdown. He stops abruptly and asks Yen exactly how old he is at this moment. Yen looks puzzled but answers immediately, noting that the prince will turn 15 in just 4 months. This answer confirms Callion's darkest suspicion. In the original history, this is exactly when the end began. In that timeline, Colleen was assassinated before he could ever truly lead. The public was fed a convenient lie, told that the weak prince had tried to poison Queen Celise and then hung himself out of a pathetic fear of punishment. It was a perfect cover-up, a story designed to erase him from history with a final stain on his reputation. But no one actually believed that to be the truth, it was just the version of reality the winners chose to write. Kalian knows that someone is going to come for his life very soon, and the shadows of the palace feel like they are reaching out to choke him. He can feel the eyes of his enemies in every corner, but he isn't the prey they remember. The doors to his chambers are thrown open with a violent bang, the servants outside panicking as they try to keep up with his sudden, frantic pace. They beg him to slow down, their voices high with a terror they can't quite hide. Kalian ignores them, his mind calculating the days he has left. He realizes he has maybe a month or two before the assassination attempt, and he refuses to spend that time waiting for the blade to find his throat. He turns to Yen with a look of absolute authority and demands a pair of scissors. Yen freezes, his eyes wide as he asks what on earth the prince could possibly need scissors for. Kalian doesn't explain, he just takes the tool, the metal glinting sharply in the sunlight. He is done being the disgusting Prince Blanche loves to kick around. He is going to change things, starting with the very image everyone uses to define him. He grabs a handful of that long, dark hair, the hair that marked him as the Dragon Queen's descendant, and begins to cut. The blades snip through the strands with a rhythmic, decisive sound that echoes in the quiet room. Yen and the maids can only watch in horror, their faces pale as they realize what he's doing. They cry out that Prince Blanche is going to hate this, that changing his appearance is an act of defiance that will bring down a storm of rage. Kalian doesn't flinch. He tells them not to worry, his voice dropping to a chillingly calm register. He refuses to live like an idiot forever just because a monster like Blanche hates the way he looks. When he finishes, the long locks lie on the floor like the discarded skin of a snake. He stands tall, his new, shorter hair framing a face that no longer looks like it belongs to a victim. He looks into the mirror and tells himself that from this moment on, he will take care of things his own way. The transformation is more than physical, it's a declaration of war. Just as the last strand falls, the atmosphere in the room turns frigid. Blanche enters, his shirt unbuttoned and his eyes full of the casual cruelty that defined Kalian's previous life. He looks at his younger brother and sneers, telling him he must be out of his mind to pull a stunt like this. Yen is already in tears, trembling at the sight of the second prince's arrival. Blanche stalks forward, his presence filling the room like a poisonous fog. He looks at Kalian's new appearance and begins to bark out a familiar insult, calling him bloody EY, but the words die in his throat. Kalian doesn't cower. He doesn't look at the floor. Instead, he calmly raises a cup of tea to his lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip as if Blanche were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He sets the cup down and addresses his tormentor directly, calling him Brother Blanche, with a level of disrespect that is practically suicidal. Blanche's face contorts with a sudden, irrational fury. He can't handle the fact that his favorite punching bag is suddenly standing his ground. He reaches for a sharp utensil on the table, his knuckles white as his temper finally snaps. In a blur of motion, Blanche lunges, the metal whistling through the air as he aims to put the trash prince back in his place. The maids scream and cover their eyes, expecting to see Kalian crumpled on the floor in a pool of blood. But the sound that follows isn't a scream of pain, it's the heavy thud of a strike being halted. A single drop of blood hits the white floor, blooming like a dark flower. Yen gasps, his eyes nearly popping out of his head as he looks at the scene. Kalian hasn't moved an inch. He has caught Blanche's blade with his bare hand, the sharp edge buried deep in his palm. Blood flows freely down his wrist, staining his royal sleeve, but his expression remains terrifyingly vacant. He stares directly into Blanche's stunned eyes, his red pupils glowing with a predatory light that wasn't there before. He doesn't even flinch at the wound. The weak prince is gone, and in his place stands a man who has seen the end of the world and isn't afraid of a little blood. The tea sits cold on the table as blood drips steadily from Kalian's palm, staining the pristine floor. Yen is practically vibrating with anxiety, his voice cracking as he points out the severity of the wound. But Kalian? He just stares with those piercing red eyes, his expression as cold as the stone statues guarding the palace. Prince Blanche stands over him, a sneer plastered across his face as he offers a pathetic excuse, claiming his hand simply slipped. It's a blatant lie, a casual act of violence meant to remind the trash prince of his place. Blanche looks down at Kalian like he's a bug, mocking the disgusting, blood-colored eyes that mark his heritage. But the boy who used to tremble in the shadows is gone. Kalian doesn't flinch. He doesn't look at the floor. Instead, he calmly lifts his cup, taking a slow, deliberate sip while staring directly into the eyes of his tormentor. He sets the cup down with a sharp click and addresses him as Brother Blanche, a level of casual disrespect that leaves the room frozen in shock. The predator has just realized his favorite punching bag has suddenly grown teeth. Back in the safety of his chambers, the silence is heavy. Kalian looks at his mangled hand, the red staining his royal sleeve like a dark flower. Yen is in tears, begging to call a healer, but Kalian shuts him down instantly. He doesn't need a miracle worker. He needs to understand the limits of this new body. He turns to Yen, his voice dropping to a chillingly analytical tone. Yen, why didn't you dodge earlier? He knew the attack was coming. Yen's response is a heartbreaking glimpse into the life Kalian used to lead. He stayed still because if he had moved, Blanche would have used it as an excuse to inflict even more pain. It's the logic of a victim, and Kalyan is done with it. He dismisses Yan, claiming he needs to wash his face to calm his pounding heart. But he isn't looking for water, he's looking for the truth hidden inside his own chest. Confidence is loud, but the silence of a man who has already died once is much louder. Alone at last, Kalyan lets the mask slip. His heart isn't just pounding from adrenaline, it's screaming. Earlier, when Blanche lunged, Kalyan's body had reacted with an instinct that didn't belong to a coward. He was about to use aura, the life force of the world's greatest warriors, to crush the blade before it could touch him. But as he focuses inward, he feels a sharp, stabbing pain that has nothing to do with the cut on his hand. Deep within the vicinity of his heart, 3 glowing mana circles begin to rotate with a violent energy. The realization hits him like a physical blow. He isn't just a prince with dragon eyes, he's a magician. In a world where the royal family is supposed to be the pinnacle of power, Kalyan has been sitting on a nuclear reactor without a manual. But there's a catch: every time he touches that power, his heart feels like it's being shredded. If he can't master this internal storm, he won't survive the assassins already lurking in the palace shadows. 3 days pass in a blur of secret training and calculated silence. The room is now filled with the frantic energy of Seton Slake, the royal tailor. He's a man who takes his measurements as seriously as a duel, and right now, he's horrified by how thin the prince has become. Yan is still hovering in the corner, weeping over the fact that the hand injury hasn't fully closed despite the passage of time. Kalyan ignores the drama, his eyes fixed on the mirror. For years, the original Kalyan hated his own reflection. He looked too much like Freya, the mother he never met, a woman whose beauty was a death sentence in this den of vipers. He had cleared every mirror from his room to avoid seeing her ghost in his own eyes. But the new Kalyan doesn't see a ghost. He sees a weapon. He tells the tailor to proceed, accepting the face that once brought him nothing but shame. He knows that looking like a victim is the best way to hide the monster growing underneath until it's too late for his enemies to run. To understand why Kalyan is a walking anomaly, you have to look at the blood flowing through his veins. The Kairos royal family are the direct descendants of dragons, specifically the great dragon Sisphanian. Legend says she blessed the bloodline with 2 divine gifts, the power of rapid healing and the innate ability to wield magic. It's called Sisphanian's blessing, and it's why the princes of this realm are usually walking gods. But Kalyan's blessing is broken. His hand should have healed in hours, yet the bandage remains soaked. The mana circles are interfering with his dragon blood, creating a deadlock that's killing him from the inside. He needs a guide, someone who understands the higher tiers of magic. His mind turns to the upcoming king's birthday. There is one man who will be there, a legend among legends, Elon Manasil, a 7th circle great magician who will eventually reach the 8th circle, the only one on the continent to do so. Kalyan doesn't just want to meet him, he needs to recruit him. As Kalyan sits in his chambers, leaning his head back with a look of cold calculation, he knows that there is no one else in this world who possesses a deeper knowledge of mana. He stares into the distance, his red eyes reflecting a mind that is already years ahead of his enemies. He realizes that if he is to fix the deadlock between his dragon blood and his mana circles, he needs a master. Elon is the only one who can help him solve the problem currently tearing his body apart from the inside. But the political landscape of the Kairos kingdom is a minefield. Kalyan watches from his window as the knights traverse the grounds, their silver armor gleaming under the sun. The kingdom is currently under the heavy shadow of the Brisson family, the kin of Prince Blanche's mother. Their influence is a cancer spreading through the court, and Kalyan knows that Blanche is merely a fuse for a war that will eventually consume everything. To keep the Brisson power in check, Kalyan needs more than just a sharp mind, he needs the raw, overwhelming power of magicians. If he can somehow bring Elon Manasil onto his side, he might actually stand a chance at stopping the catastrophic conflict Blanche is destined to start. But before he can play the grand game of politics, he has to deal with the immediate reality of his own image. In the bustling dressing room, the air is thick with the sound of rustling fabric and the chatter of servants. A sample of a lavish, frilly garment is held up, its lace and ribbons catching the light. The maids whisper about adding even more lace, thinking the current ribbons are far too small for a prince of his standing. They want him to look like the delicate, fragile boy he used to be, a porcelain doll for the court to mock. Kalyan stands there, a dark silhouette against the opulence, and delivers a cold, final verdict. No ribbons, no frills. He is done playing the role of the victim. He tells them he will deal with the wardrobe himself, his voice leaving no room for argument. He demands a look that reflects a soldier, not a sacrifice. The transition is jarring as the title card fades into a crisp, clear morning. A sparrow perches on a sun-drenched branch, its chirping the only sound in the quiet palace gardens. Inside, Colleen sits by the window, the steam from his tea rising in the morning light. He takes a slow sip, the porcelain clicking softly against the saucer as he sets it down. He's getting used to this life now, the quiet moments of peace that feel like a lie in a den of vipers. He looks down at his hand, turning it over to inspect the palm. The wound from Planche's blade has almost completely healed, leaving only a faint mark where the skin was once shredded. It's a sign that his dragon blood is finally starting to win the battle against the internal mana interference. Even better, Planche has been outwardly ignoring him since their last confrontation. In this palace, being ignored is a luxury. It means his enemies are underestimating him, giving him the shadows he needs to grow. The silence is broken by the arrival of Yen, who enters with a tray and a frantic energy. He begins listing the day's grueling schedule: horseback riding lessons in the morning, followed by a high-stakes dinner in the afternoon. This isn't just any meal. Colleen is expected to dine with the Queen and Viscount Brisson. The mention of the Viscount sends a chill through the room. Colleen repeats the name, his eyes narrowing. He knows exactly why this meeting is happening. It's about the king's upcoming birthday plans. It's a trap, a way for the Brisson family to size up the trash prince and see if he's still as broken as he used to be. Colleen knows he would have had to bump into the Viscount eventually, but the timing is aggressive. As the maids finish buttoning his shirt, Colleen prepares himself for the physical toll of the day. Yen asks if he plans to train his stamina again today, his voice full of concern. Colleen simply nods, his face set in a mask of determination. Even if it's just running laps around the lake beside the palace, every step is a battle against a body that wants to give up. The scene shifts to the bright, unforgiving sun over the palace grounds. Colleen is no longer the composed prince in the chair. He is a boy pushed to his absolute limit. He is sprinting, his boots thudding against the dirt path as he gasps for air. His lungs feel like they are filled with broken glass, and every breath is a ragged huff that echoes through the trees. He rounds the corner near the dragon fountain, his vision blurring from the heat and exhaustion. He leans against a massive oak tree, his chest heaving as he clutches his heart. I'm going to die, he thinks, the dry humor of a man who has already died once surfacing even in his agony. His stamina is pathetic, a reminder of how much the original Colleen neglected his physical form. A voice calls out, full of panic. Your Highness. Marilyn Fiat, one of Callion's maids and the second daughter of the external defense commander, comes charging toward him. She isn't just a servant, she has the blood of a warrior in her, and she's horrified by what she sees. She notes that on the first day, he managed 4.5 laps. On the third day, he did 4, but today, he's barely finished 3 and he looks like he's on the verge of collapse. Colleen can't even find the breath to answer her. He just stands there, drenched in sweat, his hair matted to his forehead. Marilyn begs him to call a healer, her eyes wide with genuine fear for his life. But Colleen snaps back instantly. No, he can't call a healer. If a professional magic user gets close enough to treat his exhaustion, they will feel the violent rotation of the 3 mana circles around his heart. His secret would be exposed in seconds, and the Brisson family would have him executed before the sun sets. He tells her it's fine, claiming his stamina has simply fallen and a healer would be a waste of resources. He forces a strained, shaky smile, telling her he'll get better as time passes. It's a blatant lie, but he has to maintain the facade. He turns his gaze toward the nearby training grounds, where the sound of clashing steel fills the air. The Pable Knight Corps is in the middle of a live sparring session. It's a chaotic symphony of violence, swords slamming against shields, armor clanking, and the roar of men pushing themselves to the brink. Commander Pable stands in the center of the madness, his voice booming over the noise. He screams at his men not to look away from the blade, telling them that if this were a real battlefield, they'd already be corpses. He is a man who respects only strength and has zero patience for hesitation. Colleen watches from the balcony, his eyes tracking every movement of the knights. Marilyn is confused, asking why he's so interested in a world he has no ties to. Colleen just smiles, his gaze never leaving the sparring knights. He tells her he's just gained an interest, but his internal monologue is far more serious. He is analyzing their forms, looking for the weaknesses he can exploit later. Suddenly, the heavy footsteps of armored boots approach. Commander Pable has noticed the audience. He looks up at Colleen with a sneer that borders on treason. He doesn't bow, he doesn't show a shred of royal respect. Instead, he addresses the prince with a voice dripping with contempt. He tells Colleen that the knights are bothered by his gaze and can't train properly with a spectator. Marilyn tries to intervene, shouting for the commander to show respect to the third prince, but Pable just laughs. He looks Colleen dead in the eye and calls him a rat bastard, who was secretly watching from the shadows. He expects the prince to flinch, to run away in tears like he used to. But the boy standing before him doesn't move. Colleen doesn't flinch. Instead of the tears or the trembling Pable expects, the prince just stands there, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a cold, sharp smirk begins to spread across Callion's face. It's not the smile of a frightened child, it's the look of a predator who just found a particularly amusing piece of prey. Marilyn Fiat, Callion's maid, can't stand the disrespect. She steps forward, her face flushed with indignation, and screams at the commander. She reminds him that he is in the presence of His Highness and demands to know how he dares to say something so imprudent. Pable doesn't even look at her. He just scoffs, claiming he only said he almost mistook the prince, so there's no reason for her to be so sensitive. He turns his gaze back to Colleen, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty as he remarks that even the prince himself doesn't seem to mind the insult. But as Pable continues to stare, his smugness begins to rot into something else. He sees a flicker in Callion's red eyes, a depth of coldness that shouldn't exist in a boy known as the palace trash. A bead of sweat rolls down Pable's temple. He tries to shake the feeling, reminding himself that this is just Colleen. Back then, the prince was definitely a weak-ass, discreet boy who would hide in the corners of the palace. Pable remembers a time when Colleen was nothing more than a shadow in the hallway, a boy who would block a path and then immediately crumble under a single harsh word. In that memory, the young prince would stammer out apologies, clutching his chest and promising to get out of the way right now. He was a weak, pathetic excuse for royalty, and yet, as Pable looks at the boy standing before him now, that memory feels like a lie. The atmosphere around the training grounds shifts violently. A dark, oppressive aura begins to bleed out from Colleen, casting a long, jagged shadow that seems to swallow the light around Pable's feet. The commander's heart begins to thud against his ribs like a trapped bird. He is a seasoned warrior, a man who has seen battle, but he finds himself paralyzed by the sheer weight of the murderous intent radiating from the boy in front of him. Colleen takes a slow, deliberate step forward. His voice is low, cutting through the silence of the grounds like a blade. He addresses the commander directly, telling him he wants to ask a question. Pable is sweating profusely now, his eyes wide with a sudden, inexplicable terror. Colleen leans in slightly, his red eyes glowing with a terrifying resolve, and asks a single, piercing question. What is your duty? The surrounding knights begin to notice the standoff. They whisper among themselves, wondering why the third prince is making such a scene. To them, he's still just a nuisance, a royal that even the lowest-ranking knights look down on. They expect the commander to put the boy in his place, but Pable can barely find his voice. He tries to regain his composure, huffing out a breath and claiming that they are in the middle of training and he doesn't have time to answer. He tells the prince to go back to whatever task he was doing, trying to dismiss him like a bothersome insect. Marilyn watches, her breath hitched in her throat, sensing that the situation is spiraling out of control. But Colleen isn't finished. He repeats the question, his voice even colder this time, demanding that Pable tell him exactly what his duty is. The weight of the command is absolute. Pable finds himself answering almost against his will, reciting the oath of his station. He stammers out that his duty is to strengthen the royal family's forces and to protect the royal family and the kingdom. It's the textbook answer, the one every knight learns on their first day. Colleen listens, then reaches out and grabs a mere tree branch from the ground. With a sharp, effortless motion, he snaps the wood in his hands. He looks at the broken pieces and then back at Pable, delivering a verdict that feels like a death sentence. He calls Pable a failure at both of the duties he just mentioned. The knights gasp, and Pable's face turns a deep, angry red, but the confusion in his eyes is greater than his rage. Colleen doesn't give him a chance to argue. He tells the commander flatly that his training is an utter mess. Before Pable can even process the insult, Colleen moves. It's not a human movement, it's a blur of speed and lethal precision. Colleen lunges forward with the broken branch, the wood whistling through the air like a mastercrafted sword. Pable's instincts scream at him to move, but his body is too slow. He realizes with a jolt of pure horror that if he fails to block this attack, he is going to die. The branch cuts through the air, leaving white streaks of force in its wake. Pable flinches, his eyes bulging as the tip of the wood stops mere millimeters from his throat. The force of the stop creates a gust of wind that ruffles Pable's hair and sends a chill down his spine. He stands there, frozen, his life hanging by a literal thread of wood. Colleen holds the position for a heartbeat, letting the commander feel the full weight of his helplessness. Then, with a look of profound boredom, Colleen drops the branch. It clatters against the stone floor, the sound echoing in the dead silence of the training grounds. Colleen turns his back on the commander, his voice trailing over his shoulder with a dry, biting disappointment. He tells Pable that he can't believe a commander couldn't even predict the movements of someone like him, someone who has supposedly never held a sword in his life. He leaves Pable standing there, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, the commander's mind reeling from the murderous intent he just faced. Pable watches the prince walk away, finally realizing that the weak-ass boy he once knew is gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Pable stands frozen, his breath hitching as a cold realization washes over him. He stares at the third prince, but he doesn't see a boy anymore, he sees a monster cloaked in human skin. The air around them feels heavy, saturated with a resolve so sharp it cuts through Pable's veteran instincts. He can only think one thing: what the hell is this? This isn't just anger, it's pure, unadulterated murderous intent. Kalian doesn't even look at the commander's trembling form. Instead, he gazes down at his own hand, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. He muses about the irony of the situation. The man who claims to be the protector of the royal family and the kingdom is the very same man who just insulted a member of that royal family in the most derogatory manner possible. Kalian's eyes, a deep, predatory red, flick up to meet Pable's. He asks a question that carries the weight of a death sentence. Should he consider this act to be treason? The word hangs in the air like a guillotine. Pable's heart hammers against his ribs. He tries to find the weak-ass boy he used to bully, the discreet prince who would hide in the shadows of the palace, but that version of Kalian is dead. In its place is a man who radiates authority and violence. Pable's mind races back to the memories of the old Kalian, a boy who would stammer apologies and clutch his chest in fear whenever he accidentally blocked someone's path. That boy would have begged for mercy just for existing. But the person standing before him now is different. Pable feels a bead of sweat roll down his temple, his composure shattering completely. He realizes with a jolt of terror that he has made a fatal mistake. This isn't the third prince he knows. This is someone, or something, entirely different. Pable's legs give out, and he collapses to his knees, the sound of his armor clattering against the stone echoing through the silent training grounds. He stammers out a desperate apology, his voice cracking with fear. He begs Prince Kalian for forgiveness, claiming that he wasn't thinking clearly. He insists that he never intended to commit treason, his eyes wide and pleading. The surrounding knights watch in stunned silence, their whispers filling the air like the buzzing of insects. They can't believe their eyes. The formidable commander is groveling at the feet of the palace trash. But Pable doesn't care about his dignity anymore. He only cares about survival. However, as he bows his head, a different emotion begins to fester beneath his fear. Deep inside, Pable is fuming. He can't handle the fact that he's being forced to humiliate himself for the sake of a prince he considers worthless. The shame burns in his gut like acid. He tells himself that he will never forget this moment. He will never forget the day he was brought low by the fucking worthless third prince. He vows silently that he will have his revenge for this humiliation. Transitioning away from the tension of the training grounds, we find ourselves in a much calmer setting, though the air is still thick with unspoken questions. A title card marks the beginning of Chapter 6. Marilyn stands in a lush garden, her face pale and her hands trembling. She looks like she's seen a ghost. Suddenly, the silence is broken by a rhythmic thudding. Kalian emerges from the greenery, but he isn't alone. He is leading a massive, powerful black stallion by its reins. The horse is a magnificent beast, its coat shimmering like midnight, but its eyes are wild and untamed. Marilyn and the other servants gasp in shock. Kalian looks completely unbothered, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. He casually mentions that he picked it up on his way back and has decided to name the horse Raven. The servants are incredulous. They demand to know where he's been and, more importantly, how he managed to fetch a horse like this. As the initial commotion settles down, the truth about the animal begins to emerge. This isn't just any horse. It's the stallion that Prince Planche, Kalian's brother, failed to tame. We see a brief glimpse of the past, where the horse is rearing up, its hooves flailing as it tosses armored knights aside like ragdolls. It is a ferocious creature, known for its uncontrollable temper and raw strength. Yet, here it is, walking calmly behind Kalian. The prince looks at Raven thoughtfully, his hand resting lightly on the horse's neck. He seems to have a strange connection with the beast. Yen, Kalian's attendant, is practically vibrating with anxiety. He asks if it's really okay to just take Prince Planche's horse like this. It's a direct provocation to one of the most powerful princes in the palace. Kalian just scoffs, his eyes glinting with mischief. He tells Yen that Planche said anyone could use the horse if they could handle it. In Kalian's mind, it's a simple case of finders, keepers. He then turns serious, instructing his staff to keep the incident at the training grounds a closely guarded secret. He knows that if word gets out about his sudden change in personality, it will draw unwanted attention. Yen is still worried, fretting about what will happen if Planche finds out about the horse, but Kalian isn't listening. Suddenly, the prince winces, his hand flying to his chest as a sharp pain shoots through him. He realizes that he has pushed this new body too far. The physical strain of the day's events is finally catching up to him. Yen notices his distress and asks if stamina training will be too much for him today. Kalian takes a breath, forcing the pain down. He tells Yen it's nothing like that. He claims he just had a good time playing around with someone after a long while, a dry reference to his encounter with Pable. He dismisses Yen's concerns and tells him to get ready quickly, as he doesn't want to be late for dinner. As Kalian walks away, Yen is left standing there, staring at the massive black horse and wondering what on earth he's supposed to do with it. Meanwhile, in a secluded, sun-drenched balcony, a mysterious figure watches the events from afar. They hold a delicate plant in their hand, their silhouette framed by the golden light. They speak of Kalian, noting that even worms will writhe when stepped on. It's a cold, calculated observation. With a sudden, sharp motion, they snapped the stem of the plant, the sound punctuating their decision to watch and wait for now. Petals drift slowly to the floor, a silent omen of the shifting power dynamics within the palace. We move to the royal dining hall, a place of opulence and stifling etiquette. Kalyan sits at the long table, the atmosphere so thick with tension he feels like he can't adjust to it, despite experiencing it every day. He looks around at his family. Across from him sits a silver-haired prince, his expression sour and his energy low. Kalyan wonders why the bastard is so out of sorts today. He muses to himself, wondering if the Queen and Viscount Brisson being late is somehow his fault. He watches the silver-haired prince closely, noting that the boy can't even control his facial expressions. To Kalyan, he is truly still just a child. Suddenly, the sound of high heels clicking against the marble floor echoes through the hall. A specific, sharp scent fills the room, one that Kalyan recognizes instantly. A smirk spreads across his face. She's finally here. The doors swing open, and a woman of immense presence enters. This is Celise Brisson, the second queen and the current queen of Kairos. She is draped in a stunning green gown, her eyes cold and calculating behind a golden fan. She is accompanied by a man in noble attire, but all eyes are on her. Kalyan knows the truth. She is the real power behind this kingdom. The history of the Kairos kingdom is written in blood and ambition, and it all began when the previous queen passed away from a sudden illness. In the vacuum of her absence, Celise rose to power, ascending to the position of queen with a cold, calculated grace. She didn't do it alone. She borrowed the immense influence of her family, the Brisson house, to seize absolute control over the royal knight corps. The majority of the nobles, sensing the shift in the wind, quickly threw their support behind the Brisson family, ensuring that with each passing day, Celise's power only grew more suffocating. In this Game of Thrones, people are merely pieces on a board, and the powerless third prince, Kalyan, was the most pathetic piece of them all. He was a boy so weak and insignificant that he became someone laughable even to a mere commander. To the elites of the palace, Kalyan wasn't a threat, he was a punchline. If the Brisson family represents the kings and queens of this board, Kalyan was the pawn that everyone expected to be swept aside without a second thought. Inside the opulent halls of the palace, Viscount Renan Brisson, the second son of Marquis Brisson, laughs as he speaks with the queen. He suggests they deal with Commander Pable as if he were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Celise, draped in her emerald gown, agrees with a chilling nonchalance, suggesting they simply pay an adequate compensation for the man's troubles. Renan bows deeply, his voice dripping with sycophantic energy as he chirps, "Yes, yes, understood." He is the type of man who would sell his own soul for a seat at the queen's table, and right now, he's busy making sure the queen isn't bothered by the trivial things. Celise hides her face behind a golden fan, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room with a mixture of boredom and disdain. She wonders aloud if she must really pay attention to such trivial matters. To her, the life of a commander or the struggles of a prince are just noise. However, beneath that fan, there is a flicker of something else, a realization that the atmosphere in the palace is shifting. She looks toward Kalyan, whose red eyes are fixed on her with a resolve that shouldn't belong to a powerless boy. The predator is starting to realize that the prey might have grown some teeth. We move to the royal dining hall, a place where the food is expensive but the tension is free of charge. Kalyan sits at the long, mahogany table, surrounded by the very people who wish for his downfall. The air is so thick with unspoken malice that it's a wonder anyone can swallow their steak. Celise breaks the silence, her voice smooth as silk and twice as deadly. She looks at Kalyan and remarks that he has grown much as of late. It's a backhanded compliment, the kind that feels like a pat on the head while holding a knife to your back. Kalyan doesn't flinch. He simply stares back, his expression unreadable. Internally, he scoffs at her observation. He knows he hasn't grown much physically, but the soul inside this body is a different story entirely. He expected this reaction. He knew they would eventually notice the change in his demeanor. He vows to himself that he will continue to grow, to become something they can no longer ignore or mock. He's playing a long game, and the first move is simply surviving this dinner without choking on the hypocrisy. Viscount Renan Brisson, never one to miss an opportunity to hear his own voice, chimes in with a boisterous laugh. He tells Kalyan that he almost didn't recognize him, noting that now that the prince is finally showing his face, it's quite nice to see. He adds, with a smug grin, that Kalyan should have cut his hair much sooner. Renan is the kind of guy who thinks he's being charming when he's actually just being a nuisance. He continues his compliments, stating that since Kalyan is still in a period of growth, he will surely grow tall. He's about to finish his sentence when he is abruptly cut off. The word brother hangs in the air, sharp and cold. It comes from Prince Planche, who is sitting across the table looking like he just sucked on a lemon. Planche is the silver-haired bastard Kalyan was observing earlier, and he is clearly not in the mood for Renan's chatter. Renan stammers, "Yes, what?" his face flushing with embarrassment as his attempt at small talk is crushed under Planche's sour mood. Planche ignores the Viscount entirely, his focus shifting to a much more pressing matter, his ego. He lets out a frustrated huff and demands that the food be brought out immediately, claiming he is starving. But everyone knows it's not hunger that's bothering him, it's the horse. Colleen watches him with a hidden smirk, thinking to himself how slow-witted the owner of the Brisson Emporium truly is. The rumors were right, the palace is full of idiots. Planche finally snaps, asking why no one told him. About what? Someone asks. Planche's eyes flash with anger as he growls about how his horse doesn't follow him anymore. He's referring to Raven, the black stallion that Colleen picked up earlier. To Planche, the horse was a symbol of his status, a beast that no one else could tame. To hear that it now follows Colleen like a loyal dog is a blow to his pride that he can't handle. He calls the animal a useless horse to begin with, trying to downplay his failure, but the bitterness in his voice is unmistakable. Unable to bear the humiliation any longer, Planche stands up, the sound of his chair screeching against the floor echoing through the silent hall. He announces that he will take his leave first, his dinner left untouched. Celise watches him go, her eyes narrowing behind her fan. She knows her son is acting like a spoiled child, but she also knows that Colleen is the one who provoked this reaction. As Planche storms out, the dining hall returns to a stifling silence. 3 weeks pass in the blink of an eye, and the palace transforms from a den of vipers into a stage for a grand celebration. It is the annual king's birthday celebration, and the city is alive with color and music. Banners hang from the buildings, and confetti drifts through the air like colorful snow. The commoners cheer in the streets, shouting for flowers and excitement. It's a day of forced joy and expensive displays of loyalty. Preparations for the banquet are in full swing, with servants scurrying about to ensure everything is perfect. Since it's His Highness' birthday celebration, we need to prepare it all without any mistakes and official barks. The elven delegation has arrived, bringing with them massive chests filled with presents that shimmer in the sunlight. The citizens gawk at the wealth on display, whispering about how fancy the banquet will surely be. They wonder if the princes are busy preparing at this very moment, imagining them dressing in silks and gold. But inside the palace, away from the cheering crowds, the reality is much darker. Colleen is being fitted for his ceremonial attire, surrounded by attendants who are fussing over every button and fold. Suddenly, the prince's head tilts back. A sharp, metallic scent fills his nose. A single drop of crimson falls, then another. Wait, why? An attendant stammers, his eyes widening in horror. Colleen's hand flies to his face, but it's too late. Blood begins to pour from his nose, staining his pale skin and dripping onto his white shirt. The servants freeze, their faces pale with shock. "Your Highness, have you been eating?" One starts to ask, but the words die in his throat as he sees the amount of blood. It's not just a simple nosebleed, it's a violent outpouring of his body's exhaustion. Colleen collapses to his knees, the sound of his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood spatters onto the floor, bright red against the polished wood. The room erupts into chaos. "Your Highness," they scream, their voices filled with panic. "Hurry and bring some fabric," someone yells, as they scramble to help him. Colleen, clutching his chest as the pain flares up again, tries to wave them off. His vision is swimming, and the world is turning into a blur of gold and red. He looks up at them, his voice a weak, trembling whisper. "It's fine," he lies, the blood still staining his lips. "It's not that bad." But as he stares at the red pools on the floor, he knows his body is finally reaching its limit. The attendants freeze, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and confusion. Colleen, ever the master of the poker face even while his body is failing him, tries to wave them off with a weak gesture. "It's fine," he lies, his voice a raspy whisper. "It's not that bad." He's a prince who has survived assassination attempts and political vipers. He refuses to be taken down by a simple biological malfunction. He tries to offer a logical explanation, claiming it's just the result of a few late nights and a lack of proper sleep. "See, it's already stopped," he says, forcing a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, even as the metallic scent of blood hangs heavy in the air. But the people around him aren't fools. They've watched him closely over the last few weeks, and they know the truth is far more concerning than a bit of exhaustion. Yen, his loyal attendant, steps forward, his brow furrowed with deep-seated worry. He doesn't look at the blood, he looks at the man. "That's not the problem," Yen says, his voice low and steady. He reaches out, his eyes scanning Colleen's frame with a clinical intensity. The older official chimes in, his voice trembling as he apologizes for being presumptuous, but he can't stay silent any longer. He points out the terrifying reality that everyone in the room has been trying to ignore. "But that isn't all, Your Highness. You've lost more weight." The words hang in the air like a death sentence. Yen looks at Colleen's waist, noting how his clothes now hang loosely where they once fit perfectly. "You definitely weren't this skinny 3 weeks ago," Yen adds, his eyes searching Kallian's face for an answer the prince isn't ready to give. Kallian looks down at his own hands, the realization sinking in. He's been pushing himself to the absolute limit, and the cost is finally being tallied. He thinks back to his training sessions, the long hours spent in the shadows of the palace grounds. Well, I have been working hard, he admits to himself. But hard work shouldn't feel like this. He remembers the grueling runs through the forest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pushed his body further than it was ever meant to go. His stamina hasn't been improving, it's been cratering. And then there's the mana. Every time he tries to tap into his internal energy, a white-hot spike of agony lances through his chest. He envisions his own heart, glowing with a sickly, pulsating light, trapped behind a cage of ribs that feel too small for the power he's trying to wield. There must be some problem with my heart, he concludes, the thought cold and clinical. He knows his body is a temple that's currently being demolished from the inside out. Back in the present, the official is practically vibrating with anxiety. This isn't something you should speak about so lightly, he barks, his hands balled into fists. Your Highness, have you received a checkup? Kallian just laughs, a dry, hollow sound. He tries to play the role of the reckless youth, asking why he would need a doctor for a simple nosebleed. Internally, however, he's cursing his luck. He hates the talk of healers and the way people look at him with pity. Why did I have to get a nosebleed in front of so many people? He wonders, his pride stinging more than his chest. He knows that in this palace, weakness is a scent that attracts predators. The official isn't backing down, insisting that it's not just about the blood. Kallian tries to laugh it off again, but the atmosphere is suffocating. That's when Yen decides to take a different approach. He crosses his arms, a mischievous glint appearing in his eyes as he looks at the other servants. I knew it, Yen says loudly, his voice cutting through the tension. It's because you were picking your nose yesterday. The room goes silent for a heartbeat before the absurdity of the statement sinks in. Kallian's jaw drops, his eyes bulging in pure shock. Huh? He stammers, completely blindsided by the accusation. Yen continues the performance, sighing dramatically as if he's revealing a shameful secret. It must have been difficult to tell everyone about such a personal hobby, he says, his face a mask of mock sympathy. The other servants begin to whisper, their fear replaced by a stifled amusement. They look at the prince, then back to Yen, the tension in the room evaporating as they imagine their dignified prince engaged in such a common, unrefined act. Kallian is speechless, his face turning a shade of red that rivals the blood on his shirt. This brat, he thinks, his internal monologue a scream of indignation. He realizes exactly what Yen is doing. He's sacrificing Kallian's dignity to save his political standing. A prince who picks his nose is a joke, a prince who is dying of a mysterious heart condition is a target. Yen leans in, a subtle wink confirming his intentions. Are you really okay? Yen whispers, his voice dropping back to a tone of genuine concern once the others are distracted. Kallian can only stare at him, his mind reeling. He realizes that Yen knows him better than anyone else in this den of vipers. The official, seemingly satisfied by the explanation, announces that he will go and mend the prince's clothes for the upcoming event. As the room clears, Yen's expression turns serious again. It's today, isn't it? He asks, his eyes locked onto Kallian's. The prince nods slowly. The games are over. He knows that at this rate, his failing health will become common knowledge throughout the entire palace. He has one chance to secure his future, and it requires a meeting that could change everything. I need to meet Elon Manisil at all costs, he vows to himself. The scene shifts as the palace prepares for the day's festivities. An official stands before a group of nobles, his voice booming through the hall. Due to the urgent business His Highness has to deal with, the prince luncheon has been cancelled. A ripple of surprise goes through the crowd, but Kallian is already moving. He is dressed in his full royal regalia, a striking figure in black and gold with a flowing crimson cape pinned by a jeweled brooch. He looks every bit the powerful prince, a stark contrast to the bleeding boy from moments ago. He walks down the long, sun-drenched corridors of the palace, his boots clicking rhythmically against the polished stone. He's nervous, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from the mana this time, but from the weight of the meeting ahead. He didn't expect a private audience, and the uncertainty of it all is gnawing at his composure. He reaches a set of massive, ornate doors guarded by knights in silver armor. The doors creak open with a heavy, ominous sound, revealing a vast office filled with the scent of old parchment and expensive tobacco. Come in, Prince, a voice calls out from the depths of the room. His Highness is waiting. Kallian steps inside, his eyes immediately finding the man seated behind a sprawling desk piled high with books and documents. This is Romain Lorun Kairos, the King of Kairos. The king doesn't look up immediately. He continues to read a document, his face a mask of cold indifference. Kallian stands in the center of the room, the silence stretching out until it feels like a physical weight. He can feel the king's power radiating from him, a suffocating pressure that demands submission. Is he ignoring me? Kallian wonders, his eyes narrowing. He knows that even if he's supposedly ignorant of palace etiquette, this is a blatant display of disrespect. He waits, his posture perfect, refusing to show even a flicker of the pain that is currently radiating through his chest. Finally, the king sets the paper down and looks up, his sharp eyes cutting through Kalyan like a blade. He doesn't offer an apology for the wait. Instead, he simply gestures to a chair. "Come sit here," he commands. Kalyan moves forward and takes his seat, his movements graceful despite his internal turmoil. The king leans back, a faint, unreadable smile playing on his lips. "I congratulate you on your 38th birthday, the king says, his voice smooth and devoid of any real warmth. He looks Kalyan up and down, his gaze lingering on the prince's pale face. "Yes, how have you been? You look good." Kalyan offers a polite smile in return, but his mind is racing. He knows the king is lying. He knows that even the passing attendants have noticed how emaciated he has become. Kalyan sits in the heavy silence of the palace, his mind a whirlwind of political calculations. He finally understands the king's game. "Now I know," he thinks, a bitter smile touching his lips. The king isn't just being thorough, he's being efficient. To Romain, meeting his sons one by one isn't a gesture of fatherly love, it's a way to minimize the waste of his precious time. If he met all three at once, he'd have to focus on making conversation and managing the room. Individually, they are just items on a checklist to be processed. Kalyan looks at the stacks of books and papers surrounding the throne, realizing that in this family, you aren't a person, you're a variable in an equation that's increasingly hard to solve. The more he peels back the layers of the Kairos royalty, the more he finds a rotting core. This isn't a family, it's a mess of competing interests held together by a crown that's losing its luster. He catalogues the players in this deadly theater. First, there's the king, a man who views his own flesh and blood with the same warmth one might reserve for a tax report. Then there's the first prince, a man so indifferent to the world that he might as well be a statue. But the real disaster is the second prince, Planche. As Kalyan watches him stumble, the stench of alcohol precedes the man. Planche knows nothing of etiquette, his royal blood drowned in a bottle. An attendant tries to warn him, whispering, "Why, your highness, we can smell the alco," but Planche just snaps, "Shut up." He's a liability in a cape, a prince who has traded his dignity for a permanent hangover. Then, the atmosphere shifts. The air grows heavy with a different kind of power. The queen enters, her heels clicking against the marble with the precision of a firing squad. She doesn't just walk, she colonizes the space. She is the only one in the palace with enough influence to look down on the king himself. Her eyes are cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. Kalyan watches her, knowing that behind that regal facade lies a predator who has survived decades in a den of vipers. She is the true architect of the palace's shadow plays. But Kalyan has bigger problems than family drama. His internal monologue takes a dark turn as he surveys the room. "Among them, there is someone trying to kill me." The realization isn't a shock, it's a confirmation. He looks at the smiling faces and the bowed heads, searching for the crack in the mask. Who sent the assassin? Was it the indifferent brother, the drunken mess, or the queen with the power to erase kings? He asks himself the question over and over, his red eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. He knows he's walking on a tightrope over a pit of stakes, and the person holding the rope is standing right in front of him. The scene shifts to the grand square. The sun is bright, but the gossip is darker. The commoners and nobles alike are buzzing. "Did you hear about it?" they whisper. The rumors are spreading like wildfire. At the square event, Prince Kalyan didn't just show up, he transformed. He's no longer the sickly, hidden prince they used to mock. Compared to him, Prince Planche looks like a common drunkard who wandered into the wrong party. The contrast is humiliating. Kalyan is standing tall, radiating a presence that demands attention, while his brother can barely keep his eyes focused. The busybodies are in a frenzy, making a fuss over every detail. They sense the shift in the wind. Something has changed deep within the palace walls, and Kalyan is at the center of the storm. The old status quo is crumbling. The prince who was once a footnote is now the headline, and the people can feel the weight of his new ambition. It's not just a change in clothes, it's a change in soul. The herald's voice booms through the hall, cutting through the chatter. The third prince, Kalyan Rain Kairos, is entering. The doors swing open, and the world seems to hold its breath. As Kalyan strides in, the silence is deafening. He doesn't look like the boy they remember. He resembles Sisphanian, the legendary figure of myth. The resemblance is uncanny, a ghost of greatness walking among the living. The crowd is paralyzed, their fans frozen mid-flutter. They came to see a weakling, they found a king in the making. Every detail of his appearance is a calculated strike. He has trimmed the bangs that once hid his face, revealing eyes that burn with a terrifying red light. Pinned to his chest is a red brooch, a splash of blood color against his pristine uniform. It's more than fashion, it's a declaration. He is telling the world, his family, and his would-be killers that he will not hide anymore. He smirks, a sharp, dangerous expression that promises retribution for every slight he's endured. The era of the hidden prince is over. Yen, his ever-loyal and slightly overexcitable attendant, leans in to whisper. He's vibrating with a mix of pride and anxiety. "Prince, why is everyone He starts, his eyes darting around the room. The nobles are staring, their eyes fixed on the gems Kolian is wearing. They are wondering how the useless third prince came to possess such treasures. Yen is caught up in the moment, thinking of how happy Seton would be to see Kolian like this. He's like a proud parent, even if he's technically a servant. Kolian watches them with a dry amusement. He knows exactly what they're thinking. They see the gems and they see a target, but they don't see the work it took to get here. He remembers the struggle to stop that guy, the eccentric craftsman who provided the finery. Yen and the others are clueless about the true depth of the game Kolian is playing. They see the sparkle, Kolian sees the armor. He turns the conversation to Yan's own life, a rare moment of personal connection. Come to think of it, Yan, you said your family's in Caresis too, right? Yan's face softens as he talks about his father and sister back in their hometown. He explains that only the rest of his family lives in the capital. Kolian asks if they'll ever come to the palace, and Yan gives a practical answer. They will, if they receive an invitation. It's a reminder of the rigid walls between the classes, walls that Kolian is beginning to dismantle. Yen tries to pivot back to business, asking when he should have Raven, Kalian's horse, on standby in the garden. But Kolian isn't interested in the schedule. He has a faraway look in his eyes. You see, I have someone I'd like to see, he says, leaving the statement hanging in the air. Yen is baffled, his eyes widening in a shock of surprise. He's a busybody at heart, and the idea of the prince having a secret meeting is more than his heart can take. Finally, Kolian tests Yen's knowledge of their surroundings. Do you know why this ballroom is called the Siegfried Hall? Yen, eager to prove his worth, launches into the history. It's named after Duke Quitros Han Siegfried, the first patriarch and one of the 8 heroes of the Two-Way War. The Siegfrieds are the sole Duke family in Caeris, a lineage of power and loyalty that has spanned 500 years. The Siegfried family crest glows with the weight of history, representing a lineage that has remained unshakably loyal to the royal family for half a millennium. Their single-minded commitment to defending the territory of Sisvanian is the stuff of legends, a story that deeply impressed Kolian back when he was still known as Burin. In this world of shifting alliances, 500 years of loyalty isn't just a record, it's a miracle. High above the ballroom, Kolian leans against the balcony railing, his gaze fixed on the festivities below. Yen leans in, his voice a hushed whisper as he asks if the person the prince wishes to see is among the crowd. Before Kolian can answer, a boisterous, earth-shaking laugh erupts from the floor below, cutting through the music and chatter like a blade. The source of the noise is impossible to miss. Duke Slayman Han Siegfried stands in the center of the hall, a wine glass in hand and a wide, genuine grin stretching across his bearded face. He radiates a raw, unpretentious power that stands in stark contrast to the stifling etiquette of the palace. Kolian watches him with a sharp, calculating eye, noting that the Duke is exactly the type of person he likes, loyal, powerful, and refreshingly direct. A family with such long-standing loyalty is a rare currency in this den of vipers, and Kolian intends to spend it wisely. A dangerous smirk plays on Kalian's lips as he decides to test the man's reputation. He doesn't move a muscle, but he allows a tiny, razor-thin thread of mana to flow outward, a silent challenge directed straight at the Duke. It's a move that would go unnoticed by 99% of the people in this room, but Slayman isn't most people. Instantly, the Duke's eyes sharpen, his jovial expression replaced by the cold, lethal focus of a predator. His head snaps upward, his gaze locking onto the balcony where Kolian stands shrouded in shadow. The speed of the reaction is terrifying. Kalian's smirk deepens. The Duke found him instantly, even though he only let a fraction of his presence slip. It's a confirmation of everything he suspected. Slayman isn't just a noble, he's one of the 5 swordmasters of the continent. There was no way a man of his caliber wouldn't pick up on even the slightest ripple in the air. Yen, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, looks worried, but Kolian remains composed. He quietly instructs his attendant to act like he didn't notice a thing. It's quite a feat to draw the attention of a swordmaster, and while Kolian is grateful for the confirmation of the Duke's skills, he knows it's still too early to reveal his full hand. The Duke eventually looks away, returning to his wine, but the silent acknowledgement has been made. Below them, the party reaches a crescendo as a high-ranking noble raises his glass. The golden liquid shimmers under the chandeliers as he bellows a toast that echoes through the hall, to Caeris. The crowd erupts in a chorus of laughter and clinking glass, celebrating a kingdom that is far more fractured than they realize. While the nobles drown themselves in wine and false security, Kolian and Yen make their move. They aren't leaving through the front doors. In the dim light of the palace exterior, Yen finds himself clinging to a rope, slowly descending from the high balcony. He looks terrified, his eyes wide as he dangles over the drop, while Kolian moves with the grace of someone who has done this 1,000 times. They reach the ground silently, slipping through the shadows toward the stables. Kolian approaches a magnificent black horse named Raven. He strokes the animal's mane, noting how smart and gentle the creature seems. Yen, still catching his breath from the descent, warns the prince not to be fooled. Raven might act like a saint when Kolian is around, but the moment the prince turns his back, the horse becomes a nightmare for everyone else. It seems even the animals in this palace have two faces. Seeing how quick-witted Raven is, Colleen can't help but admire the beast. It's a perfect match for a prince who survives on his own wits. They mount up and ride toward the front gate, the cool night air a welcome relief from the suffocating ballroom. However, their exit isn't going to be as simple as their escape from the balcony. As they approach the massive stone archway, two guards step forward, their long spears crossing with a sharp metallic clank. The message is clear, the path is blocked. The guards stand firm, their faces set in stone as they inform the prince that he cannot enter or leave without a formal invitation. It's a bureaucratic wall designed to keep the trash out and the assets in. Just as the tension begins to peak, a mysterious figure appears near the gate. He is draped in a heavy, dark hood that obscures his features, but his presence is impossible to ignore. Callion's eyes narrow as he recognizes the man. The stranger doesn't seem intimidated by the spears or the royal guards. He stands there with a quiet, mocking confidence that suggests he's seen far more dangerous things than a few palace sentries. When prompted, the man reveals his identity in a voice that carries a hidden weight. My name is Elon Manisil. The name hangs in the air, a trigger for Callion's memories. Elon smirks under his hood, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and disdain. He looks at the guards and the grand gate, commenting dryly on how Kairos seems to differentiate the class of its guests based solely on their appearance. It's a pointed jab at the kingdom's superficiality. Callion realizes that Elon is nitpicking on purpose. The man is looking for any excuse to turn around and walk away from the festivities. He's a man who values his freedom more than a royal invitation, and he's currently 1 foot out the door. Elon sighs, a shucks escaping his lips as he turns his horse around. He tells the guards that if an invitation is so strictly required, he'll simply go back where he came from. Callion's heart sinks. He knows that if Elon leaves now, he might never get another chance to recruit him. We'll lose him at this rate, he thinks, his mind racing through the political consequences. The king's orders are absolute. No one is allowed outside for the duration of the festival. It's a lockdown disguised as a celebration, and Elon is about to break it by leaving, while Callion is about to break it by following. Callion turns to Yen, his voice urgent and commanding. He tells his attendant to do anything he can to distract or stop the soldiers. Before Yen can even process the order, Callion digs his heels into Raven's sides. The black horse rears up and then charges forward like a bolt of dark lightning. The guards scream for the prince to stop his horse, their voices full of panic as they realize he has no intention of slowing down. Spears are leveled, but Callion doesn't flinch. He isn't just riding toward a gate, he's riding toward his future. The sound of Raven's hooves thundering against the stone drowns out the guards' protests. They scramble to get out of the way as the third prince of Kairos blasts through the perimeter, leaving the safety of the palace walls behind. The guards are left in a cloud of dust, shouting that the prince has gone outside, their orders shattered by a single, desperate charge. Callion doesn't look back. He only has eyes for the hooded figure disappearing into the night. Yen is left staring at the empty space where his master used to be. His mind is a whirlwind of panic, his eyes wide as he realizes the sheer scale of the trouble they are in. He clutches his head, whispering to himself in a frantic loop, wondering what on earth he is supposed to do now. At this rate, the entire palace will be in an uproar before the sun even sets. Yen knows he can't just stand there, he has to act, even if his knees are shaking. He takes a deep breath, trying to find a shred of the composure Callion always seems to have. He tells himself to focus, reminding his racing heart that he is the attendant of Prince Callion. He has to protect the prince by any means necessary, because that is his sole responsibility in this den of vipers. If he fails here, there won't be a future for either of them. He bites his lip so hard it nearly bleeds, the resolve finally starting to outweigh the fear. He knows the guards are waiting for an order, or at least an explanation for why the trash prince just turned into a bolt of lightning. Yen points a trembling finger toward the gate, his voice regaining some of its authority as he commands the soldiers to stop. He knows he's about to play a very dangerous card, one that could cost him his head if he's wrong. He shouts at the top of his lungs that Duke Siegfried himself has allowed Prince Callion to leave. The guards hesitate, their spears wavering as the weight of that name hits them like a physical blow. One of the soldiers looks back in disbelief, demanding to know who Yen thinks he is to use the Duke's name so freely. Yen doesn't flinch, standing his ground as he declares his identity. He is Saroyan Siegfried. He is the eldest son of Duke Siegfried, and his word carries the weight of 500 years of loyalty. He reaches up, pulling back his hair to reveal the face of a man who belongs to the most powerful lineage in the kingdom. The atmosphere shifts instantly, the air growing heavy with the sudden realization that the Siegfried family is now officially involved in the prince's escape. The title of the eldest son isn't just a label, it's a shield that the guards dare not strike. But while the courtyard is a scene of chaos and confusion, the source of that authority is elsewhere. High above the tension, a boisterous, earth-shaking laugh erupts, cutting through the night air. Duke Slayman Han Siegfried is having the time of his life, his massive frame shaking with genuine mirth. He finds the entire situation absolutely hilarious, a stark contrast to the stiff, suffocating etiquette of the royal court. He looks at his son, Soroyan, with a mix of pride and amusement, still chuckling as he apologizes for his outburst. He tells Soroyan that he simply can't believe his son did something so clever. It's a rare compliment from a man who is one of the 5 sword masters of the continent. The Duke remembers when his son left to raise a little kid, a decision that seemed strange at the time but is now bearing very interesting fruit. Soroyan sits on a bench beside his father, his expression much more serious as he listens to the Duke's ramblings. He tells his father to stop laughing, insisting that this isn't something to be joked about. He knows the political ramifications are massive, even if the Duke is treating it like a theater performance. Soroyan argues that his decision was a good one, but the Duke isn't so sure. He warns his son that the king, His Majesty, will definitely find a way to ruin the relationship between the Siegfrieds and the crown if he feels threatened. But Soroyan is confident, his eyes sharp as he tells his father that the king won't even ask. He knows how the royal mind works. It's a machine built on suspicion and calculation. The Duke pauses, his laughter dying down into a thoughtful smirk as he considers his son's words. He realizes that Soroyan is right, the king thinks too much, and that is his greatest weakness. If the prince just happened to get help from the Siegfried family, he'll be put in a position where he's on alert from their goodwill. It's a subtle, psychological cage that the king will find himself trapped in. If there's an established relationship and the prince received help but doesn't receive a punishment, the king has a problem. It would be the same as the crown acknowledging an amicable relationship between the Siegfried family and the third prince. And if that happens, the Brisson family, the prince's rivals, will probably find fault with it immediately. The Duke smirks, realizing that his son has set a trap that the entire court will fall into. He doesn't care what the reason behind Colleen leaving was, the result is all that matters. Whether it was an emergency or a whim, the political board has been reset. While the nobles play their games of shadows and words, the prince is already miles away. The hooded figure of Elon Manisil rides through the quiet streets of the city, the sound of his horse's hooves muffled by the night. He doesn't look back, his focus entirely on the path ahead, until he senses a presence behind him. He realizes that he isn't being followed by a guard or an assassin, but by the prince himself. Elon slows his horse, a dry, mocking smile playing on his lips as he waits for the boy to catch up. He comments that it doesn't seem like the prince is here to criticize him for not having an invitation. He wonders why the third prince of Kyrus is following an old man like him into the darkness. Elon turns his head slightly, his eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and disdain. He tells Colleen that he went to a closed door when another was already open for him, a cryptic remark about the prince's choices. He admits to himself that Colleen is quite a fun prince, a rare spark of interest in a world he usually finds boring. When he first saw the boy, he noticed that his gaze didn't seem like the gaze of a 14-year-old. There was a weight in those eyes, a depth of experience that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Colleen doesn't answer with words, he answers with action. He digs his heels into Raven's sides, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. He reaches out, his hands snapping forward like a predator's strike. He grabs the dark fabric of Elon's cloak, his fingers locking on with a grip that suggests he has no intention of letting go. Elon is visibly shocked, his eyes widening as he feels the raw determination radiating from the boy. Callion's face is a mask of strain and focus, his teeth gritted as he pours everything he has into this moment. A faint, red glow of mana begins to swirl around his hand, a sign that he is pushing his body far beyond its natural limits. He grunts in pain, a low ugh escaping his lips as the energy threatens to hand trembles, veins bulging as a violent red aura erupts from his grip. He isn't just holding on, he's a starving man at a banquet, and Elon Manisil is the only thing on the menu. The energy is raw, jagged, and completely overwhelming, threatening to tear his mana circuits apart before he can even process the gain. He's pushing his 14-year-old body to a breaking point that should be physically impossible, but Colleen has never been one for following the rules of biology. Elon's mana is flowing into me, he gasps, his teeth gritted so hard they might shatter. It's a desperate, high-stakes gamble, and the house is currently screaming in pain. The horses rear back, the air crackling with the sudden discharge of power as the connection stabilizes. Raven neighs in alarm, sensing the unnatural shift in his master's energy, while the hooded figure remains eerily still, watching the boy endure the impossible. This isn't a prince meeting a subject, it's a predator meeting a puzzle. Colleen clutches his chest, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage of bone. He looks up, his vision swimming in a sea of red and black, and realizes the hooded figure is staring right through his royal facade. Even with the doors shut, wind cannot be blocked, he muses internally, the metaphor tasting like copper in his mouth. The secret he's been guarding, the crumbling, terminal state of his own vessel, has been laid bare in a single moment of contact. She's already noticed the state of my body, he realizes, the panic momentarily eclipsing the agony of the mana transfer. It turns out, Trying to hide a dying body from a master mage is like trying to hide a bonfire in a dark alley. The figure speaks, her voice a calm blade cutting through the freezing night air. Wind cannot be blocked, huh, she repeats, mocking the very idea of his secrecy. Kallian's eyes narrow, his mind racing to find a countermove, but the figure's internal thoughts are even more cutting. She remembers a time when mana was a distant dream, a locked door she couldn't even find the key for. From a certain point, I could not use mana, she reflects, her gaze fixed on the boy. But looking at Kallian, she sees a different kind of tragedy. No, the problem isn't the mana. Does he really not know? She sees the rod at the core of his power, and yet, he's still standing. A hand tightens on the reins, knuckles white against the dark leather. The silence between them is heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the cobblestones of the quiet street. Kallian's gaze is fixed, searching for a single weakness in the woman who seems to know his every flaw better than he does. He's a prince playing a game of gods, and he's just realized his opponent has seen his entire hand and is currently unimpressed by his bluff. The history of the Kairos bloodline looms over the scene like a shadow, a legacy of arrogance and wasted potential. They are the descendants of dragons, beings of pure power, yet they treat mages like dirt beneath their boots. It's a bitter irony that the great mage came to such a family of her own volition, not out of loyalty, but out of spite. Her goal was simple, to make a fool out of them for losing the greatest power in the world from right under their arrogant, royal noses. And now, she's found a prince who might actually be worth the trouble. Back in the present, Kallian sits atop Raven, the moonlight catching the silver embroidery of his uniform and making him look like a ghost of the man he used to be. He looks every bit the royal, yet he's following a shadow into the dark like a moth to a very dangerous flame. Why did you want to see me? He asks, his voice steady despite the mana still burning through his veins like liquid fire. He knows he can't afford a single slip-up in this conversation. He'll know if I lie, he reminds himself, staring into the abyss of the mage's hood. He's standing on the edge of a precipice, and the only way forward is to jump. He straightens his back, the weight of a crown he hasn't yet won settling on his shoulders with the force of a mountain. Kallian Rain Kairos, he declares, putting his full name and his very life on the line. It's a gamble, a declaration of war, and a plea for an alliance all wrapped into one. He looks at the mage with eyes that have seen death and returned, refusing to blink even as the world around him begins to blur. The scene shifts to the grand, imposing facade of the palace, a gilded cage for a prince hated by all. This is the reality Kallian was born into, or rather, the one he was thrust back into after his soul made its long journey home. He is a man surrounded by enemies, a falling figure in a garden of thorns where every rose is a dagger. Every step he takes is on broken glass, and the palace walls are just waiting for him to shatter so they can sweep up the pieces. Suddenly, the mage's hand moves with a fluid, practiced grace. A sharp snap echoes through the street and the world goes deathly quiet, the ambient noise of the city erased in an instant. Kallian's eyes widen as a shimmering hexagonal barrier ripples into existence around them. Silence magic, he gasps, his voice failing to leave his lips as the spell takes hold. The mage didn't even chant, she didn't even breathe a word. He cast it without even saying anything. I guess he really is a seventh circle mage. The sheer scale of the power gap is enough to make a lesser man collapse, but Kallian just gets more interested. The mage leans in, her eyes glowing with a predatory curiosity that makes the hexagonal barrier look like a spiderweb. Is your goal, to simply stop that from happening? She asks, her voice appearing directly in his mind like a telepathic intrusion. Or are you trying to get rid of the root cause? She's digging into his soul, looking for the ambition that drives a dying boy to chase a throne. Kallian doesn't flinch, instead, a slow, dangerous smile spreads across his face, the kind of smile that usually precedes a kingdom falling. The mage is taken aback by the sheer audacity of it. The throne is just an option to reach his final goal, she wonders, her skepticism warring with her intrigue. When he's a prince with nothing but a dying body, she sees the contradiction, a man with the ambition of a conqueror and the lifespan of a candle in a hurricane. Kallian begins to walk, his stride purposeful and steady, leaving the horses behind as he moves toward his destiny. The mage watches him, her gaze lingering on his back as he disappears into the gloom. He reminds her of Sisphanian, a name that carries the weight of legends and the scent of old blood. This isn't just a prince, it's a man using the monarchy as a temporary stepping stone to something much larger. The prince who needs me for his goal, she whispers to herself, her arms crossed over her chest. How interesting. The tension finally breaks, replaced by a cold, hard pact forged in the moonlight. Please give me the invitation again. Then, the mage says, her voice losing its mocking edge. Show me what you've got. Kallian doesn't hesitate for a single second. He drops to one knee, the prince bowing to the commoner in a reversal of every social law in the kingdom of Kairos. I greet my mentor, he says, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable conviction. The mage smiles, a thin, sharp line that promises both salvation and suffering. Yes, I will, Elon Manasil, accept your highness' invitation. Save you. It's a promise and a threat all in one, a bond that will either raise Kalyan to the heavens or bury him in the dirt. The scene cuts to a quiet garden bench where Soroyan Siegfried sits with his father, the Duke. The high-stakes drama of the street feels worlds away, yet the political danger is just as real. Soroyan is anxious, his hand hovering near his face as he contemplates the mess they've made. "You're sure that the people in the royal palace don't know who I am, right?" he asks, his voice barely a whisper. The Duke just chuckles, a deep, booming sound that dismisses the very idea of failure. "I told you so. I took care of it. You don't need to worry." Soroyan sighs, the weight finally leaving his shoulders as he realizes the cover-up held. "I guess if they recognized me, I couldn't have stayed by his highness' side." He points a finger at Soroyan, his eyes crinkling with a mix of affection and mockery. "Yes, he's my son, but he doesn't seem royal," the Duke roars, finding the boy's lack of aristocratic arrogance to be the funniest thing he's heard all week. Soroyan remains silent, his face a mask of stoic endurance. He's used to his father's boisterous nature, but tonight, the laughter feels like a barrier between them. The silence stretches, heavy and uncomfortable, as Soroyan stares at his own intertwined fingers. He finally finds the courage to speak, his voice barely a whisper. About Leah," he begins, the name hanging in the air like a fragile piece of glass. He's asking about the life he left behind, the sister who stayed while he chose the path of a shadow. The Duke's expression softens, but only slightly. He looks at his son with a gaze that is both proud and piercing. "She's been doing great in the position of the lower family head that you have abandoned," the Duke says, the word abandoned hitting Soroyan like a physical blow. It's a reminder that every choice has a cost, and Leah is the one paying for Soroyan's loyalty to the prince. The Duke leans back, his posture relaxing as he shifts the conversation. "Anyway," he says, his tone turning casual, almost dismissive. He raises a hand, gesturing to the vast world beyond the palace walls. "If you want to give up playing servant for some kid, you're welcome to come back any day." It's an open invitation to return to the light, to reclaim the name Siegfried and all the power that comes with it. But Soroyan doesn't hesitate. He knows where he belongs, even if it's in the shadows. "I guess I won't be seeing you for a while," Soroyan says, his voice steadying. He's drawing a line in the sand, choosing the prince over the patriarch. The Duke's eyes narrow, his amusement fading into a cold, calculating curiosity. He watches his son, looking for a flicker of doubt, but finds only a hard, diamond-like resolve. "We'll see each other again in 3 months, Soroyan declares. It's not a request, it's a prophecy. He's giving himself a deadline, a window of time to see Kalyan's plan through to its end. The Duke leans in, his face inches from his son's. "Are you really thinking of giving up your position as his servant?" he asks, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. He can't comprehend why a Siegfried would choose to serve anyone, let alone a prince who is currently the kingdom's favorite punching bag. Soroyan doesn't answer. He just looks down at his hands, his knuckles white. The tension is thick enough to choke on. The Duke pushes further, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Are you really planning on stepping down as that rascal's attendant?" He calls Kalyan a rascal, a term that is half insult, half grudging respect. He sees the way Soroyan's shoulders tense at the mention of the prince, and he realizes that this isn't just about duty anymore. It's about something much more dangerous, loyalty. Soroyan remains hunched over, his gaze fixed on the ground. He looks like a boy carrying the weight of the world, and in many ways, he is. The Duke watches him, his expression unreadable. He's going to be 15 soon, the Duke notes, his voice softening. It's a reminder of the ticking clock, the coming of age that will change everything for the princes of Kairos. He looks at his son's bowed head and realizes that the boy he knew is gone, replaced by a man he doesn't quite understand. The Duke sighs, a sound of weary resignation. "Hey, son," he says, his voice regaining its strength. "Do you know what the nickname of our Siegfried family is?" He waits for a beat, the silence of the garden amplifying the question. Soroyan looks up, his eyes wide with confusion. He knows the history, the legends, but he doesn't know where his father is going with this. The Duke's face breaks into a wide, predatory grin. "The elephants of Kairos," he declares. The words feel heavy, ancient, and full of hidden meaning. He lets out another roar of laughter, a sound that feels like a challenge to the very stars above. As he laughs, the scene shifts, the garden fading into a vast, sun-drenched savanna. A herd of elephants moves across the plains, their massive bodies a testament to unstoppable power. They are the kings of this realm, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that commands respect. For a long time, the Siegfrieds have never vied for the throne, content to be the power behind the power, the giants that no one dares to disturb. But even giants have enemies. Suddenly, the peace of the savannah is shattered. A predator, a snarling beast with bared fangs, leaps from the tall grass, its eyes fixed on the elephants. It's a moment of pure, primal terror. But the elephant doesn't flinch. With a roar that shakes the earth, it strikes back, its massive tusks and powerful trunk turning the predator's attack into a suicide mission. Blood spatters across the screen, a violent reminder that even the most peaceful giants are capable of devastating destruction. But we're powerful, the Duke's voice narrates over the carnage. The elephant stands over the fallen beast, a symbol of absolute dominance, and are called the king of animals, whom even beasts can't touch. The metaphor is clear. The Siegfrieds are the elephants, and anyone who mistakes their silence for weakness is in for a very bloody surprise. Back in the garden, Soroyan is reeling, his mind trying to process the violent imagery his father just conjured. "Why are you suddenly?" he starts to ask, but he's cut off as the Duke lunges forward. In a sudden, overwhelming display of fatherly affection, the Duke scoops Soroyan into a crushing hug. "I'm saying my name, which you sold off, is strong," the Duke bellows, his voice muffled by his son's hair. He's not just talking about the family name. He's talking about the strength he's passed down to his son. He tells Soroyan to do everything he wants to do, to be the elephant in the room that no one can ignore. But the sentimentality is short-lived. The Duke's hug is less of an embrace and more of a wrestling move. Soroyan's face turns blue as he struggles to breathe. "Stop! Stop! Father, it really hurts," he screams, his voice cracking with genuine pain. The Duke just laughs harder, squeezes the life out of his son as if he's trying to physically press his strength into the boy's bones. "I'm really going to die." Soroyan gasps, his limbs flailing. It's a classic Siegfried moment, half heartfelt encouragement, half accidental assault. Eventually, the Duke lets go, and Soroyan stumbles back, gasping for air and adjusting his disheveled uniform. He glares at his father, his eyes watering. "Anyway, Duke Siegfried, bugger off immediately," he snaps, his royal facade completely shattered by the near-death experience. He turns on his heel and marches away, his dignity trailing behind him like a tattered cape. The Duke watches him go, a smirk playing on his lips. "Gosh, that pointless stubbornness of his," he muses, his voice full of a strange, twisted pride. He's definitely a Siegfried. He realizes that his son hasn't abandoned the family. He's just taking the Siegfried brand of stubbornness to a new, royal level. The Duke's gaze shifts, his eyes turning toward the grand silhouette of the palace. "Anyway, that rascal," he says, his thoughts returning to Prince Kolian. He wonders what the boy is thinking, what kind of game he's playing that requires a Siegfried to act as his shadow. The scene shifts to the palace at dawn, the rising sun casting long, golden shadows across the ornate stonework. A carriage approaches, its wheels clattering against the cobblestones with a rhythmic, insistent sound. It's not just any carriage, it's a statement. The crowd of nobles and servants gathers, their whispers a low hum of curiosity and dread. "My goodness, I'm not seeing this wrong, am I?" one noble asks, her fan fluttering nervously. They all stare at the crest emblazoned on the carriage door, 7 red flowers and a silver cane. It's a symbol that hasn't been seen in the capital for years, a ghost from a dark chapter of the kingdom's history. "Is it really that crest?" another whispers, his voice trembling. The rumors begin to fly, each one more scandalous than the last. They speak of Elon Manisil, the mage whose name is synonymous with both genius and tragedy. They remember the stories of his son, the boy who was poisoned, the heir to a legacy of mana that was cut short by palace intrigue. "I heard his contract with Reberon was over," a noblewoman says, her eyes fixed on the carriage. "But how come he's visiting Kairos?" The implication is clear. Elon Manisil doesn't do anything without a reason, and his presence here means the political landscape is about to be hit by a magical earthquake. The carriage door opens, and a figure steps out, his long, silver hair catching the morning light. It's Elon himself, and he looks exactly as the legends described, powerful, enigmatic, and utterly unimpressed by the royal spectacle. He looks around at the shocked faces of the nobility, a sharp, knowing smirk crossing his lips. "My new disciple did something very cute," he says, his voice carrying a playful malice that sends shivers down the spines of everyone listening. He's not talking about a simple favor. He's talking about a move that has just upended the entire social order. He thinks back to his conversation with Kolian, the boy who had the audacity to give a 7th circle mage a schedule. "Got it, master." At 9:30 exactly, Kolian had said, his finger raised in a mock authoritative gesture. "You need to come through the open door at this time." The nobles are in a state of total collapse. Is His Highness planning on competing with the Brisson family? They wonder, the realization of Kalian's ambition finally sinking in. He hasn't just brought a mage to the palace, he's brought a nuclear option. Elon walks toward the palace entrance, his stride confident and predatory. He knows he's the most dangerous man in the room, and he loves it. That won't be easy, he muses, thinking of the battles to come. He realizes now that Kalian wasn't just looking for a teacher. He was waiting for the perfect moment to show off his new weapon to the nobles and shake the entire game up. As he enters the grand hall, the guards stand aside, their faces pale. The master mage has arrived, and the prince is ready to collect his winnings. "His Highness is waiting," the final voice echoes. The official knows his duty, however, and prepares for the inevitable. He stands before the grand, ornate doors of the inner sanctum, his posture stiff. He informs the guest that His Highness is waiting, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his mind. He leads the way, his back to the silver-haired legend, walking through the silent halls of power. The weight of the moment is heavy, pressing down on the servants who bow as they pass. They reach the private chambers, where the air is thick with the scent of expensive tea and the lingering tension of a kingdom on the brink. Inside, the tea is poured, the steam rising in delicate curls between the two men. The official, a man of high standing and even higher stress, takes a seat across from the mage. Manasil doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He looks around the room with a predatory grace and drops a bombshell. He needs a place to stay in Kairos. The official nearly chokes on his tea. The request is simple, but the implications are a political earthquake. As the official stares into his cup, his mind begins to race. He thinks of the power struggle currently tearing the court apart. In order to compete with Solis, he realizes he needs a power exactly like Elon Manasil's. He looks at the mage, who is sipping his tea with an infuriatingly calm smile. The official wonders what the man is truly planning. Is he here as an ally, or is he the final nail in the coffin of the current order? The silence in the room is deafening, broken only by the soft clink of porcelain against a saucer. Manasil leans back, his eyes twinkling with a dangerous sort of amusement. He begins to tell a story, his voice smooth as silk. He mentions that last night, at the plaza, he saw something interesting, a black cat with red eyes. The official listens, confused by the sudden shift in topic. Manasil continues, noting that the cat was quite intelligent, so intelligent, in fact, that he thought he should teach it a few things. He sighs dramatically, lamenting that he doesn't have a place to stay to conduct such lessons. The official's brow furrows. A black cat, in the plaza? He asks, almost despite himself, what the mage could possibly want to teach a stray animal. Manasil's smile widens, revealing a glimpse of the sharp intellect beneath the silver hair. Magic, of course, he replies. He isn't just talking about spells, he's talking about the fundamental restructuring of a soul. He explains that he plans on making an environment the cat will like, and to do that, he needs to help the owner of the house and clean the place up a bit. The official's eyes go wide as the metaphor finally clicks. The cat isn't an animal, it's Prince Kalian. And the house that needs cleaning is the Kairos royal palace. The official is visibly shaken, his hands trembling slightly as he processes the sheer audacity of the mage's plan. Manasil doesn't let up. He reveals his true hand. He has decided to take Prince Kalian as his disciple. This move effectively places the boy under the protection of a seventh circle mage, a shield that even the powerful Breeson family cannot hope to break. This was Kalian's true invitation, a masterstroke of planning that the official never saw coming. The realization hits him like a physical blow. The boy he thought was a useless rascal has just secured the most dangerous teacher in the world. The official stands up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He is flustered, his royal facade crumbling. He quickly agrees to provide a place for the mage to stay, muttering that the house is already a mess, so it can't possibly get any worse. He needs to leave, to breathe, to report this impossible turn of events. As the official retreats, Manasil's internal monologue takes over. He watches the man go, his thoughts returning to the young prince. He admits to himself that he's curious. He had heard that the child was nothing special, a boy who was scared of horses, a child riddled with fears and weaknesses. He had heard it was hard to find anything normal about the boy's health, that he was a fragile thing destined to break. But the boy who invited him here didn't match those descriptions. Manasil looks down at his hands, thinking of the elephants of Kairos, the Siegfried family nickname. They are the giants who never vied for the throne but held the power to crush anyone who disturbed them. He wonders if Kalian is a hidden elephant, a predator disguised as prey. He asks the official, who is still lingering near the door, if he knows the prince's height. It's a strange, specific question that catches the man off guard. Manasil is looking for physical proof of the change he senses, a sign that the boy is growing in more ways than one. Manasil reflects on the nature of power and perception. At times, he thinks, attention can be a poison, and indifference can be a remedy. He knows well that, being busy, is just an excuse used by those too afraid to act. He claims to cherish the princes, especially Kalian, who has already become precious to him. The official tries to end the discussion, sensing the danger in the mage's words. But Manasil isn't finished. With a sharp snap of his fingers, the air in the room fractures. A shimmering, hexagonal barrier of red magic erupts, surrounding the official. The man is paralyzed with shock. How can anyone use magic so casually within the royal palace? It's a violation of every law and security measure in place. Manasil ignores the man's protests and begins a cold, clinical observation. He notes the man's dry lips and his breathlessness. He sees the bluish tinge to his skin and the purplish hue beneath his fingernails. He notices that the man's clothes, prepared only a month ago, are now loose, He has lost a significant amount of weight in a very short time. The official tries to stand, to break the spell, but he is overcome by a wave of dizziness. He sinks back, his eyes closed, unable to raise his body. Manasil looms over him, his voice dropping to a low, prophetic rumble. He warns the man that if he continues to be a mere bystander in this Game of Thrones, he will lose everything. It is a final, chilling ultimatum. The scene shifts away from the tension of the drawing room to the quiet halls of the palace as noon approaches. A maid scurries through the corridors, looking for Yen. She is worried. It's almost midday, and the prince still hasn't had his morning tea. She holds a delicate, gold-rimmed teacup, the liquid inside still warm. Reaches the grand doors of the inner sanctum, her posture stiffening as she prepares to face the inevitable. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of expensive tea and a lingering tension that feels like a physical weight. The maid carefully sets the tray down, her eyes darting toward the bed where the prince remains motionless. She whispers a plea, asking for the tea to be taken, but the silence that greets her is deafening. Prince Kalyan is still sleeping, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. It seems yesterday was a bit too hard on him, leaving the young royal drained of every ounce of energy. Yen stands by the bedside, his face a mask of concern as he watches over his master. He knows the prince's health is a fragile thing, a secret they've been guarding with everything they have. But they aren't alone. In the shadows of the room, a silver-haired figure watches with a predatory grace. It's Elon Manasil, the legendary mage, and his presence here is a political earthquake. Yan's eyes go wide as he realizes the mage is standing right there, inside the most secure room in the palace. He stammers out the prince's name, his voice cracking with shock. Manasil doesn't move, his gaze fixed on the sleeping boy. He asks if the prince is still not awake yet, his voice smooth as silk and carrying an edge of dangerous curiosity. Yan is paralyzed. How did this man get past the guards? How is he standing here so casually? The attendant's royal facade is crumbling, his mind racing to find a way to handle a man who treats palace walls like they're made of paper. Yen tries to maintain some semblance of authority, reminding the guest that outsiders can't enter Shermill Palace without explicit permission. It's a weak protest, and they both know it. Manasil simply smiles, a look of infuriating calm on his face. He explains that it wasn't a simple walk-in, it was a warp. He notes that warping is a bit more difficult than simple teleportation, but then again, he is quite good at magic. Yen isn't in the mood for a lecture on arcane theory. He snaps that the mage's skill isn't important right now and demands that he leave immediately. The prince's health is still not. Yen stops mid-sentence, his breath catching in his throat. Manasil has stepped closer, his eyes twinkling with a dangerous sort of amusement. He asks Yen if he recognizes him. The question hangs in the air, heavy with a history Yen thought he had left behind. Manasil leans in, his voice dropping to a whisper. He mentions that Yen came to Reborn a few years ago. He asks if Yen really thought he wouldn't recognize him just because he grew up. Then, he says the words that shatter Yen's composure completely, baby elephant. It's a reference to the Siegfried family, the giants of Kyrus who never vied for the throne but held the power to crush anyone who disturbed them. Yen is a hidden elephant, a predator disguised as prey, and Manasil has just pulled back the curtain. Yen is visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he processes the sheer audacity of the mage's revelation. He thinks of his father, the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him in this moment of vulnerability. He's terrified of being caught, of the implications this secret has for the prince he serves. Manasil just laughs, a dry, mocking sound. He tells Yen not to worry, noting that his son doesn't look all that elegant, so no one would suspect him anyway. It's a roast wrapped in a threat, and Yen is currently having a mental breakdown while Manasil treats the royal palace like a budget Airbnb. But the chaos is interrupted by a stir from the bed. Kalyan is finally waking up. He blinks, his vision clearing as he looks at the two men standing over him. He calls out for Yen, his voice groggy and confused. He asks how long he's been asleep, unaware of the magical standoff that just took place. Yen quickly tries to regain his footing, informing the prince that he has a guest. Kalyan sits up, his eyes landing on the silver-haired mage. He's startled, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality of Manasil's presence. Manasil doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He reaches into his robes and pulls out a small, red silk pouch. He tosses it toward the prince, telling him to take it. Kalyan catches it, his fingers tracing the smooth fabric. He opens the pouch to find a collection of shimmering white pearls. They look like gems, but the way Manasil speaks of them suggests something far more potent. Kalyan asks if it's medicine, his brow furrowing in confusion. Manasil takes a seat, his eyes narrowing as he begins a cold, clinical observation. He tells the prince to eat one daily without forgetting. Then, he drops the bombshell. He tells Kalyan that right now, he's facing two major issues. The first is that he can't manage his mana. The second is that his body is thinning extremely rapidly. Kalyan is stunned. He hasn't said a word about his condition, yet this man sees through him like he's made of glass. Manisil notes the prince's dry lips and the bluish tinge to his skin. He points out that Kalyan's clothes, which were likely tailored only a month ago, are now hanging loose on his frame. The prince has lost a significant amount of weight in a very short time, a sign of a body under extreme duress. Kalyan realizes that the boy he thought was a useless rascal has secured the most dangerous teacher in the world. He asks if the problem is his heart. Manisil nods, his expression turning serious. He asks Kalyan if he's ever thought of the blessing as a strange combination. He's referring to Sisfanian's blessing, the power that is supposed to grant healing and an affinity for magic. Kalyan admits that he thought the healing power was somehow gone. But Manisil corrects him. The power of the blessing didn't disappear. Neither has his heart malfunctioned, nor is his mana blocked. Kalyan is confused. If the blessing is still there, then why is he failing? Why is his body breaking down? Manisil leans forward, his gaze piercing. He asks the prince if he's ever considered that the blessing is being used to its limit somewhere else. The realization hits Kalyan like a physical blow. The blessing isn't gone, it's working overtime to keep him alive. He asks the question he's been dreading, was it poison? Manisil doesn't blink. He explains that healing such a deadly poison has put an impossible strain on Kalyan's heart. The healing power was at its absolute limit, fighting a war inside his veins every single second. On top of that, Kalyan tried to use mana, and that's why his heart rejected it. It wasn't a lack of talent, it was a survival mechanism. His body couldn't handle the influx of energy while it was already burning through everything to neutralize the toxin. Then, Manisil reveals the final, chilling truth. This wasn't a recent plot. It wasn't something planned shortly before it was carried out. Originally, the real Prince Kalyan was assassinated. He was already poisoned and dying before the current soul even possessed his body. The prince stares at the mage, his mind reeling from the depth of the conspiracy. If he was already dead, then why is he still here? Why did the blessing choose to save a ghost? Kalyan's eyes burn with a crimson intensity that feels far too heavy for a boy his age, his gaze fixed on a past he can't forgive. He clenches his fist so tightly his knuckles turn white, the dark, smoke-like aura of his rage swirling around him like a physical weight. He demands to know why they had to hang a child who was already at death's door, the injustice of it gnawing at his soul. The silence in the room is heavy, broken only by the intensity of his breathing as he stares into the void of his own memories. He isn't just angry, he's vibrating with a bloodthirst that feels ancient. Manisil, the silver-haired mage, stands frozen as he watches the boy. He's seen monsters and kings, but the sheer pressure radiating from this 14-year-old is something else entirely. It's not the kind of malice a child should possess, it's the cold, calculated killing intent of a seasoned warrior. Manisil's eyes widen in genuine shock, realizing that the boy sitting before him is a complete enigma. What is he, really? The question hangs in the air, unanswered, as the prince's aura slowly begins to settle. Kalyan looks down at his hand, where a single, shimmering white pearl rests. It's small, elegant, and holds the power to change everything. He realizes that if Manisil is giving him this, then this must be the antidote he's been searching for. Manisil regains his composure, his long silver hair catching the light as he confirms the prince's suspicion. He admits the medicine was made in a rush, a desperate attempt to counter the darkness spreading through Kalyan's veins, but he's confident it will work. Kalyan doesn't immediately swallow it. Instead, he stares at the pearl with a look of cold calculation. He's not thinking about recovery. He's thinking about the mechanics of his own assassination. A dangerous thought crosses his mind, one that makes his eyes sharpen with a new, terrifying light. He asks Manisil what would happen if he took both the poison and the antidote together. It's a question that borders on insanity, and Manisil's reaction is instantaneous. The mage's face contorts in horror, his voice cracking as he shouts in disbelief. Taking both wouldn't cure him. The antidote would only serve to slow down the poison's effects, leaving Kalyan in a state of perpetual, agonizing decay. But Kalyan doesn't flinch. He simply mutters that it's good enough, his mind already 3 steps ahead of everyone in the palace. Manisil is nearly breathless, his hands gesturing wildly as he tries to talk sense into the boy. He asks if the prince even knows who the culprit is, expecting confusion or fear. Instead, Kalyan gives him a look of chilling certainty. Yes, he has an inkling. He's not guessing. He's piecing together a puzzle that was designed to be unsolvable. He thinks back to his daily routine, the small habits that define a prince's life. The source of the poison is the tea he drinks every single morning. It's the perfect weapon, subtle, consistent, and hidden in plain sight. He drinks it in front of everyone, a performance of health that makes it easy for the assassins to track his intake. No one else shares the tea with him, making it the safest, most efficient method to slowly erase him from existence. The realization is a cold splash of reality. He understands now that the original Kalyan must have noticed what was happening to his body. The boy probably realized he was being fed death in a porcelain cup and rejected the tea, hoping to save himself. But in this den of vipers, rejection was a death sentence. Maybe that's why the original prince ended up being assassinated so violently. He stopped playing the part of the victim, so they forced the ending. The situation has changed now that a new soul possesses this fragile body. Kalyan knows he's walking a tightrope over a pit of swords. He doesn't know what new methods they might use to kill him now that their slow poison has failed to finish the job. At the very least, he needs time. He needs to figure out their next move before they realize he's no longer the prey they remember. He decides he must keep all of this a secret, a hidden war fought in the shadows of the royal court. If the truth about the morning tea gets out, it won't just be his life on the line. Yen and the other servants, the few people who have shown him genuine loyalty, will be the first ones the culprits target to cover their tracks. He can't let his allies become collateral damage in a game they don't even know they're playing. Manasil watches him, his expression softening into something resembling respect, or perhaps pity. He looks at the prince and thinks to himself that the baby elephant will be just fine. It's a strange nickname, a reference to a hidden power that is only just beginning to wake up. Kalyan looks up, his resolve hardening. He understands the stakes now. He turns to Yen and gives a firm command. Tomorrow evening, he must be escorted outside the palace. He needs to move, to breathe air that doesn't smell like treason and old tea. The scene shifts to the dark corners of the kingdom, where the true architects of this misery reside. A voice whispers into the gloom, calling someone foolish. We see the silhouette of a man in a high-backed chair, the very image of entrenched, corrupt power. He speaks of trump cards and the price of victory. To take someone else's greatest weapon, you must be willing to offer something of your own first. It's a cold philosophy of sacrifice and greed. An old man with a face like crumpled parchment and a smile that reveals far too many sharp, yellowed teeth leans forward. His eyes are filled with a predatory glee, his saliva practically dripping as he contemplates the prince's downfall. He's a man who has forgotten the meaning of mercy, a creature of the dark who thrives on the ruin of others. Kalyan is reminded of his father in moments like this, not out of love, but out of a shared understanding of how the world truly works. The transition to the next morning is jarring, the bright sunlight of the palace a sharp contrast to the dark conspiracies of the night. A maid's voice rings out, frantic and loud, calling for Prince Planche to wake up. She's banging on the door, her desperation echoing through the hallway. The door is thrown open with a violent crash, revealing a room that looks like the aftermath of a hurricane. Prince Planche is sprawled in bed, shirtless and disheveled, looking like he spent the last week drowning in a wine cellar. He's the polar opposite of Kalyan, loud, messy, and clearly falling apart. A woman in a stunning, dark blue gown enters the room, her presence commanding and cold. She doesn't just walk in, she invades his space, her eyes filled with a sharp, aristocratic fury. She doesn't care about his hangover or his comfort. She immediately begins berating him, her voice a whip. She reminds him that he was banned from drinking at the square ceremony, yet here he is, reeking of alcohol and failure. Planche tries to ignore her, reaching for a glass of water with a trembling hand, but she isn't finished. She drops the news that is currently shaking the foundations of the court. Kalyan has taken on a mentor, and not just any teacher. He's secured the 7th Circle mage, Elon Manasil. The aristocrats, the very people Planche needs to stay in power, are already beginning to waver. Their loyalty is shifting toward the younger prince, drawn to the sudden display of competence and powerful backing. Planche freezes, the glass halfway to his lips as the weight of the news sinks in. The queen, or perhaps his mother, tells him to get ready immediately. There will be many eyes watching him today, and the margin for error has vanished. She leans in close, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. She warns him that he better not disappoint her, the threat hanging in the air like a guillotine. She turns and leaves, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, leaving Planche alone with his rage. He grits his teeth so hard his jaw muscles bulge, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hatred. He can't handle the pressure, the constant comparison to a brother he thought was already dead. In a fit of blind fury, he smashes his glass against the floor, the shards flying everywhere. He doesn't even notice the blood dripping from his hand where the glass cut him. He screams at the servants to get out, his voice a raw, ugly sound that fills the room. He's a cornered animal, watching his inheritance slip through his fingers, and he's ready to burn everything down just to stop Kalyan from taking it. The air in the capital is thick with the scent of celebration and the deafening roar of 1,000 voices. As the grand parade begins, the citizens of Kairos erupt in a unified shout, their voices echoing against the stone walls of the palace. They cry out, "Hooray to His Highness, King Romain." The streets are a sea of color, decorated with flags and cascading flower petals that catch the morning light. King Romain sits high atop his dark steed, a picture of royal grace and absolute authority. He waves to his subjects with a practiced, benevolent smile, acknowledging the birthday wishes that rain down upon him. The crowd is relentless, their cheers of "Congratulations on your birthday," filling every corner of the square. High above the chaos, tucked away behind the stone frame of a palace window, the silver-haired mage Manisil watches the spectacle with a detached, calculating gaze. He listens as the people scream for blessings upon the king's future and prosperity for the kingdom of Kairos. Below him, the royal procession continues its slow march. Two princes ride side by side, their capes billowing in the wind, but the crowd's attention is already shifting. A young boy in the crowd points frantically, his eyes wide with excitement as he tugs on his father's sleeve. "Daddy, over there, all the princes have come out," he shouts. His father lifts him higher, his voice low and serious as he instructs his son to watch carefully. He isn't pointing at the king or the elder princes, he points to the figure at the very back of the line. "The one at the very back is the one you wanted to see so badly," the father says, his gaze fixed on the young boy riding the black horse. "Prince Kalian." Kalian feels the weight of those thousands of eyes, but he doesn't falter. He turns his head slightly, offering a faint, enigmatic smile to the commoners, his crimson eyes glowing with a hidden intensity. As the procession moves forward, Yen, Kalian's loyal attendant, pulls his horse closer. His face is etched with worry as he asks, "Prince, how is your body?" He studies Kalian's face, searching for any sign of the frailty that has plagued the boy for years. After a moment, Yen lets out a long, shaky breath of relief. "Phew. It's a relief that your complexion looks better than yesterday." Kalian maintains his calm facade, his voice steady as he replies, "Of course, I rested well." But internally, the prince is conducting a much more clinical assessment. He places a hand over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. He thinks to himself that it must be because he consumed the antidote, but it has definitely become easier to breathe. The crushing weight that once sat on his lungs has lifted, and the sharp, stabbing pain in his heart has finally decreased. He thinks of the small leather pouch hidden away, filled with shimmering white pearls, the medicine Manisil crafted in a desperate rush. It is the only thing keeping the poison in his veins from finishing its work. However, the respite is brief. Yen begins to list the day's grueling schedule, his anxiety returning in full force. "But today's plans are too much," Yen frets. "After the parade, a horseback riding show, and then a ball. What if you get another nosebleed at this rate? This is too much." Kalian can't help but let out a small, dry chuckle at his attendant's mothering. "Haha. Yen, you worry too much. Still, I can meet the subjects in good condition." "That's enough for M," his sentence cuts off abruptly. His horse, Raven, suddenly tosses its head, sensing a shift in the atmosphere that the humans have yet to notice. Kalian's gaze snaps toward the crowd, his eyes narrowing as he spots two hooded figures standing perfectly still amidst the cheering masses. One of them has long, silver hair peeking from beneath a dark cloak. Suddenly, a visceral, blood-soaked memory flashes through Kalian's mind. He sees a man named Burin, his back turned, riddled with arrows like a pincushion. The image is stark and haunting, accompanied by a phantom voice commanding, "Lift your sword again." Then, the vision shifts to a man with messy blue hair and a face scarred by battle. "Kiri." Kalian's heart hammers against his ribs. He mutters, his breath hitching. He stares at the hooded figure in the crowd, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Kiri. That's definitely Kiri. He is paralyzed by the impossibility of it. What is Kiri doing here in Kairos? Before he can react, Raven begins to act up, the powerful horse sensing its master's sudden distress. The animal rears and shifts, its hooves clattering against the cobblestones. Yen panics, his voice rising in a frantic plea. "Wait, why is he suddenly acting up? Go forward, Raven. Raven, go forward." Yen looks around in a daze, wondering if there is something in the environment spooking the beast. Is it because there's something over there? Kalian ignores the shouting, his focus entirely on the hooded man who is now disappearing into the throng of people. He reaches out, his hand stroking Raven's neck to steady the horse. "No, Raven," he whispers, his voice dropping to a deadly, low tone. "You felt it too, didn't you?" He looks back at the spot where Kiri stood, his mind racing through the implications of this encounter. He knows he cannot break formation, not with the king and the entire court watching. "But, we can't go right now." He closes his eyes for a brief second, the image of the bloodied Kiri from his past life burned into his retinas. "Just wait, Kiri. I will find you." The parade eventually concludes, transitioning into the next phase of the royal festivities. A man with silvering hair and a sharp, well-groomed mustache bows deeply before the prince. "This is Melfur Polun, the owner of the massive Polun Emporium. Your Highness." Melfur exclaims, his voice dripping with the practiced reverence of a high-end merchant. "I'm so honored to be able to serve you like this." Kalian watches him coolly, noting the man's expensive attire and the way he adjusts his cuffs. He remembers the political landscape clearly. Baron Melfur is the one who has prepared today's horseback riding show, stepping in to fill the void left by the Brisson family. Kalian reflects on the useless war of nerves that led to this change, but his thoughts are elsewhere. He doesn't care about the merchant's flattery. He is thinking about a different memory, a darker one. In his mind's eye, he sees the silhouette of a man hanging from a gallows. Randall gets hurt in this horseback riding show, Kalian thinks, his expression turning grim. and Baron Polun gets hung. He realizes he is walking directly into the center of a historical tragedy, one he now has the power to rewrite. Melfur gestures toward the grand entrance of the arena. Please come this way. I've prepared special seats for you. Colleen follows, his boots clicking rhythmically on the polished floors as they pass under massive, ornate chandeliers. He stops for a moment, his gaze drifting upward to the ceiling. The light from the hundreds of candles reflects in his red eyes. It's that, he thinks with chilling certainty. That chandelier's the one that's going to fall. He finds the entire situation suspicious. This is an event that the king himself is attending. In such a high-stakes environment, wouldn't the royal knights have checked something as massive and obvious as a faulty chandelier? He thinks of the Brisson family's Pable Knight Corps, who are currently on standby throughout the arena. Ugh, thinking of the Pable Knight Corps reminds me of that annoying commander. He recalls a man with a smug, punchable face who once mocked him, calling him a rat bastard. A dark, predatory smirk slowly spreads across Callion's face. He isn't afraid of the falling glass or the impending chaos. Instead, he feels a surge of cold, calculated ambition. He looks at the unsuspecting merchant leading the way and thinks, well, should I give him an opportunity to live? Melfur, completely unaware that the prince has just predicted his execution and the collapse of the ceiling, beams and gestures forward. This way, prince. If anything feels off, I'll do my best. Colleen cuts him off mentally, his eyes fixed on the trap above. I feel uneasy about the chandelier above my head, he thinks, his smirk deepening as he prepares to turn a disaster into his greatest advantage. Startled, Melfur can only stammer as the prince gives a simple, chilling command, examine it. The merchant scurries off, his face pale with sweat as he stares up at the golden fixture, wondering if his entire future is about to come crashing down. Outside, the arena explodes with the sound of galloping hooves and the deafening roar of the crowd. The horseback riding show has begun, a whirlwind of dust and speed that masks the danger lurking in the rafters. Melfur eventually takes his seat in the royal box, his heart hammering against his ribs, not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated greed. He thinks to himself that his moment has finally arrived, weeping internally at the honor of sitting next to Prince Colleen. He's so blinded by his own ambition that he nearly forgets the prince's warning. As the show reaches its peak, the merchant's confidence begins to waver. He looks at Callion's stoic expression and the haunting words, above my head, begin to loop in his mind. A cold realization washes over him as he stares at the ceiling one last time. Did he actually check it, or did he just sign his own death? Stands frozen in the shadows of the rafters, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His hands are raised as if to catch a ghost, his eyes wide and bloodshot as they lock onto the frayed remains of a heavy rope. Just moments ago, he was a man of business and greed, but now, he is a man who has looked into the abyss. The rope hangs there, a silent witness to a murder that didn't happen. Melfur stammers, his voice failing him as he realizes the sheer scale of the disaster he narrowly avoided. Just what? He whispers, the words catching in his throat. He looks down from his high perch, his gaze falling upon the golden chandelier that should have been his tomb. It's a terrifying sight, the massive fixture swaying slightly, held up by nothing but luck and a warning. He thinks back to the prince's chilling command to examine it. If it weren't for that advice, Melfur would be nothing more than a stain on the marble floor right now. Just imagining the sound of the crash is enough to make his skin crawl. He looks down at the royal box, seeing the small, composed figure of Prince Colleen. The merchant is trembling, his mind racing to catch up with the reality that his life was saved by a boy he barely respected. But the question burns in his mind like a hot coal. How did Prince Colleen know about this? Below, in the seat of power, Prince Colleen sits with a grace that defies his years. He leans his head on his hand, a faint, knowing smirk playing on his lips as he watches the chaos of the arena. He isn't looking at the show, he's looking at the pieces he's moved across the board. He thinks of Melfur Polun, the man currently vibrating with fear in the rafters. Melfur is a greedy man, yes, but he is also decisive. Colleen notes that the merchant knows how not to chase the immediate benefits dangled before him, but instead possesses the rare ability to look further into the future. To give up on staying next to the king in favor of survival, that judgment is rather useful to a prince with Callion's ambitions. However, the game is far from simple. Callion's eyes narrow as he considers his enemies. The Brisson family, the true power players in the shadows, already have their guards up against Polun. They are wary, sensing a shift in the winds of commerce. Colleen wonders why they would go so far as to cause a commotion like this just to stifle a merchant. The stakes are rising, and the smell of blood is beginning to mask the scent of the arena's dust. The roar of the crowd erupts, a deafening wave of sound that shakes the very foundations of the stadium. Colleen turns his gaze toward the arena floor, his expression remaining a mask of stoic indifference. Beside him, the other royals are caught up in the spectacle, but Kalian is focused on the tension radiating from the seats around him. The horseback riding show is about to reach its peak, a whirlwind of speed and danger that the audience craves. A bald announcer with a voice like grinding stones steps forward, his arms wide as he tries to manage the exploding energy of the masses. "Okay, please calm down," he bellows, his face flushed with the effort. "This isn't the end." He gestures wildly, promising even greater thrills to keep the gold flowing into the coffers. Next up, the pride of our horseback riding show, he continues his practiced hype, but Kalian isn't listening to the words. He's looking at the man sitting nearby, Prince Planche. Planche sits with an air of unearned superiority, his eyes fixed on Kalian with a loathing that borders on the pathological. Internally, Planche is a storm of arrogance and bile. "It's so disgusting that I feel like gagging," he thinks, his lip curling in a sneer that he barely hides. To him, Kalian is an infection, a reminder of something he deems beneath him. "That disgusting and pathetic dirty blood of yours, that is." Planche is convinced of his own purity, his own right to rule, and he views Kalian's very existence as an insult to the crown. He watches Kalian, waiting for a moment of weakness, a sign that the accident with the chandelier has shaken the boy. But Kalian doesn't flinch. Instead, Kalian feels the weight of Planche's gaze and offers a subtle, razor-sharp smirk in return. He knows exactly what Planche is thinking. He knows the pathetic and dirty blood comment is the only weapon the second prince has left. Kalian's eyes flash with a dangerous light. "Planche, I don't know what you're planning," he muses internally, his hand moving to his hair in a gesture of casual boredom. But then, his smile widens, becoming something truly predatory. "But to think there'd be a time when you'd be of use." To Kalian, Planche isn't a rival. He's a sacrificial pawn that has finally found its place on the board. Across the box, Celise of the Brisson family is reaching her breaking point. She sits rigidly, her fan held like a dagger against her chin. She looks at the nobleman beside her, her voice a low, sharp hiss of frustration. "Okay, Celise," the man whispers, trying to keep her calm, but she isn't having it. She is tired of the failures, tired of the incompetence that surrounds their faction. "How long will you continue being dragged down for?" she demands, her eyes burning with a cold fire. She snaps her fan shut with a sharp clack that sounds like a bone breaking. The sound echoes in the small space, a punctuation mark on her patience. "Stupid bastard," she mutters, her teeth gritted so hard her jaw aches. "I warned him so often." She is referring to Planche, whose clumsy attempt at an assassination has only served to alert their enemies. Suddenly, her eyes widen, and a look of genuine shock crosses her face. She stares at Kalian, a cold realization washing over her. She sees the way he carries himself, the way he seems to be enjoying the very disaster meant to destroy him. She gasps, her breath hitching in her throat. Celise realizes the truth in a moment of terrifying clarity. Kalian didn't just survive the incident, he orchestrated the revelation of it. He did it on purpose, she thinks, her heart hammering against her ribs. The why and the how swirl in her mind, but the today is what scares her most. Why choose this moment, in front of the entire nobility, to show his hand? Around them, the whispers begin. The nobles are like sharks sensing blood in the water. They've heard the rumors about the second prince, Planche, and his involvement in the unfortunate accident. The prestige of the Brisson family is crumbling in real time. "I can no longer support Prince Planche in this situation," one noble whispers behind a gloved hand. The sentiment spreads like a virus. If Prince Kalian is the one that Elon Manisil supports, then perhaps the winds have truly changed. Wouldn't he be suitable as a crown prince candidate? Another asks, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence for Planche's ambitions. The nobles realize they can't just stand by idly anymore. They need to make a decision, and they need to make it before they are left behind by the new tide. The performance in the arena finally draws to a close. A massive golden statue of a warrior stands in the center of the sands, bathed in the dying light of the afternoon sun. The crowd's cheers are a dull roar in the background as the political landscape of the kingdom shifts permanently. Randall, the stoic prince, has avoided the unfortunate accident entirely, his position seemingly untouched by the chaos. Romain, the man with Celise, remains eerily quiet, showing almost no reaction to the scandal involving Planche. Kalian watches them all, his red eyes scanning the room like a predator counting its prey. He settles his gaze on Celise. She is being too quiet, too still. He knows her well enough to know that this silence isn't peace, it's calculation. If the incident Holun was something she had actually planned, or if she's simply trying to figure out how Kalian stole her move. Celise, he thinks, his eyes locking onto her profile. Is today's incident something you didn't expect too? In a more private setting, Kalian sits across from Burin, the two of them engaged in a high-stakes game of chess. The room is dim, the only light falling on the carved pieces and the prince's pale hands. Burin leans forward, his voice hushed. Burin, do you think the incident in Kairos was just a terror incident targeting the royals? Kalyan moves a piece, his fingers lingering on the cool stone. He doesn't look up as he poses a deeper question. Is there another external reason for trying to hurt the prince? Burin hesitates, his eyes darting to the board. Who knows? It wouldn't be fun if I told you easily. Kalyan lets out a soft, dry chuckle. He gestures to the board, where the black and white pieces are locked in a stalemate. Shall we make a bet? He asks, his voice smooth as silk. He points out that the incident felt too explicit, too obvious. It was as if the perpetrators wanted to get caught for targeting royalty. He explains the logic with a cold, terrifying efficiency. If the second most powerful emporium owner in Kairos, Melfer Polun, was removed from the equation, the power vacuum would be immense. A vision of a fallen chess piece and a severed head appears in his mind, a metaphor for the brutal reality of their world. The person who would benefit most from Polun's death is obvious. It would be Renan Brisen, the most powerful emporium owner in the kingdom. Kalyan stares at a pile of gold coins and glittering gems, the physical manifestation of the greed driving this plot. He turns to his loyal attendant, Yen, his voice dropping to a businesslike tone. Yen, what important businesses does the Polun Emporium own? Yen thinks for a moment, his expression thoughtful as he stands near a dark horse in the stables. That's probably Polun's diamond mine. The pieces finally click into place for Kalyan. If Polun disappears, the Brisen Emporium gets to wield total market influence over diamonds. It wasn't just about a throne, it was about a monopoly. Kalyan smirks, a genuine look of amusement crossing his face. You're using your brain quite well, Renan, he whispers to the empty air. He admits that he wanted to save Polun to observe the situation, but now he sees a way to turn this greed into his own weapon. He feels he should receive a significant payment for saving the merchant's life. His eyes glow with a predatory red light as he laughs, a sound that would make Melfer's blood run cold all over again. He turns to Yen, his decision made. Yen, cancel all of my plans after the performance. Yen's eyes bulge in shock, his mouth hanging open. What? But, he stammers, leaning on his cane. Most of the nobles will be at the ball aft. He can't even finish the sentence before the sheer gravity of the situation overwhelms him. To Yen, skipping the post-performance ball isn't just a breach of etiquette, it's social suicide in a kingdom built on whispers and appearances. He begins to tear up, his face contorting with a mix of frustration and genuine hurt. The comments I heard earlier were too shocking, he wails, his fists clenched in front of his chest as if trying to hold his crumbling world together. Why, your highness? He cries out, desperate for the prince to reconsider. But Kalyan isn't moved by the theatrics. He simply raises a hand to his head, looking slightly weary of the drama but entirely firm in his resolve. He knows exactly what he's doing. With a faint, knowing smirk, he looks toward the horizon, the light catching the sharp lines of his face. So, he muses, his red eyes glowing with a quiet intensity. I won't be able to participate in the ball. It's a declaration of war against expectation, a move that signals he's no longer playing by the nobility's outdated rules. The risk is high, but the reward of staying away from the viper's nest is higher. Kalyan is choosing his own path, and the court will just have to deal with the empty seat. This is the first step in a much larger game. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, the palace is bathed in a haunting, golden glow. The spires of the capital stand like silent sentinels, witnessing the shift in power that no one else has realized yet. Inside the lavish halls, the atmosphere is far from celebratory. We move into a private chamber where a single cup of tea sits on a polished table, steam rising in a slow, lazy spiral. The man sitting there, Romain, looks like he hasn't slept in a week. He is the picture of aristocratic despair, his head resting in his hand as he stares into the amber liquid. The silence in the room is heavy, suffocating. He is a man watching his family's influence erode in real time, and he has no idea how to stop the bleeding. The tension is thick enough to cut with a blade. He is waiting for something, or someone, to give him a sign that all is not lost. But for now, there is only the ticking of the clock and the cooling tea. He is a man on the edge, and the fall looks very, very long. Suddenly, the narrative shifts into the dark, twisted corridors of Prince Planche's mind. The screen darkens, filled with the negative energy of his hatred. Planche's face is a mask of pure loathing, his eyes narrowed into slits. It's so disgusting that I feel like gagging, he thinks, the words dripping with a pathological level of arrogance. To him, Kalyan isn't just a rival, he's a biological error. The disgusting and pathetic dirty blood of yours, that is. Planche is obsessed with purity, with the divine right he believes is his alone. He views Kalyan's very existence as a personal insult to the crown. This isn't just political rivalry, it's a deep-seated, irrational hatred that will eventually be his undoing. He is so blinded by his own perceived superiority that he can't see the trap being laid right beneath his feet. Confidence is loud, but Planche's arrogance is deafening. He is a man who believes he is the sun, unaware that the eclipse has already begun. Back in the present, Romain is shown in a moment of profound vulnerability. He is holding a hand, perhaps a memory of the mother they lost or a silent plea to the sister he's trying to protect. Romain, he whispers to himself, the name a heavy burden. Our Colleen. The words are a mix of regret and fear. He knows the boy he once looked down upon is now the greatest threat to their survival. But the heavy silence is abruptly shattered. A servant bursts into the room, his voice high and frantic. Why, your highness? The queen has arrived. The doors swing open with a violent force, and we see Celise. She isn't the fragile, injured woman Romain was just mourning in his thoughts. She is sitting upright in a high-backed chair, her blue hair perfectly coiffed, her eyes sharp and calculating. She is a predator in silk, and she is ready to move her pieces. The queen hasn't just arrived, she's taken command of the room before she's even spoken a word. Celise watches with a cold, detached interest as a maid pours a fresh cup of tea. I will bring a fresh set of tea, the girl whispers, her hands trembling as she senses the lethal tension between the royals. Celise's gaze is like ice. There was a prior guest. I didn't hear about that. She's probing, looking for any detail Romain might have missed. She is a woman who thrives on information, and any gap in her knowledge is a weakness she won't tolerate. Romain tries to maintain his composure, but he looks like a man drowning in shallow water. No, it's fine, Celise says, her voice smooth as velvet over a razor. She'll leave soon. She snaps her fan shut with a sharp, bone-chilling clack. So, Celise, Romain begins, leaning forward as he tries to regain some semblance of control. He looks at her, searching for a sign of her true intentions. But Celise is a master of the mask. She offers nothing but a cold, steady stare. The game has moved from the arena to the tea table, and the stakes are just as deadly. About today's incident, Celise begins, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What if Brisson takes responsibility for it? Romain's heart nearly stops. He stares at her, realizing the sheer scale of the sacrifice she's suggesting. He thinks back to Planche's disastrous slip of the tongue from the day before. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a public humiliation that discouraged Celise and forced her into this corner. Planche's slip of the tongue discouraged Celise. Romain watches her, his mind racing. Does that mean her priority is Planche's position? He's trying to figure out if she's still loyal to the second prince, or if she's simply trying to save the Brisson name from total annihilation. Responsibility, he mutters, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He realizes that to save the future, they have to burn a significant part of their present. Celise is ready to light the match, and Romain has no choice but to watch it burn. Celise continues her cold-blooded analysis. What do you think about rewarding Baron Poulun who hosted the performance? She asks, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Romain is confused for a moment, until she reveals the true cost. She suggests giving up the exclusive right that Brisson has over the supply of royal horses and the management of the stables. It's a monopoly they've held for generations, a cornerstone of their wealth and influence. Romain is stunned, his fingers tapping nervously on his arm as the reality sets in. She's giving up the transactional value of her safe assets. It's a desperate move, one that signals just how much Colleen has shaken them. It's just as Elon said. Romain thinks, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. They are no longer the ones dictating the terms. They are reacting, scrambling to keep their heads above water while Colleen watches from the shore. Romain realizes the depth of the trap. There's no way that Celise will give up the royal guards because of this, he thinks, clutching his hands together. She's not that desperate, not yet, but she is offering an appropriate price to buy their way out of the current scandal. It's a tactical retreat, a way to minimize the damage before Colleen can capitalize on it further. So you, your highness, should pretend you don't know about it. It's a demand disguised as advice, and Romain knows he has to take it. He looks at her, seeing the iron will behind her calm exterior. For today's ball, he decides, his voice firming up, Planche shall enter with me. It's a show of unity, a desperate attempt to project strength where there is only rot. Celise hides her triumphant smile behind her fan, her eyes crinkling with a dark, satisfied joy. She has secured their survival for another day, but the cost has been astronomical. The scene shifts to the grand ballroom. The palace is a whirlwind of silk, gold, and whispered treachery. Romain and Planche enter the ball together, walking side by side as if the events of the day never happened. But the court isn't fooled. The announcement rings out through the hall. As a reward for the performance, Baron Poulun has received exclusive rights over the supply of royal horses and stables. The nobles erupt in a flurry of hushed conversations behind gloved hands. Everyone knew that this was a deal between Romain and Celise for Planche. It's a public admission of weakness, a sign that the Brisson family is bleeding. To think Brisson would accept such damages. The prestige of the second prince's faction is crumbling. What Prince Planche said yesterday wasn't something that could have just ended as a mistake. The nobles are like sharks sensing blood in the water. This means that Prince Kalian has risen to a point where Solis is wary of him. The political landscape has shifted permanently. I think it's time to reconsider our alliances again. The Vipers are already looking for a new master. Back in the quiet of his own quarters, Prince Kalian is a world away from the noise of the ball. He is surrounded by a literal mountain of presents, boxes of every shape and size piled high against the walls. It's a physical manifestation of his sudden, meteoric rise in popularity. Yen stands in the middle of the room, looking completely overwhelmed as he holds a clipboard. Isn't this too explicit? He mutters, looking at the sheer volume of bribes disguised as gifts. What should I do with all of these presents, Prince? Kalian looks at the pile with a look of mild, dry amusement. He knows these aren't tokens of affection. They're the desperate offerings of people trying to buy a seat at his table. Although it's a good thing that Planche and Brisen's power is diluting, he muses, his red eyes glowing with a sharp, predatory light. He has no use for fickle people. I don't need bastards who change their minds like bats. He makes his decision with a casual wave of his hand. Send everything but the 2 things we got from Baron Polun to the Mage Association. He's not just rejecting the bribes, he's funding his own interests with his enemy's money. And check who sent these. He wants a list. He's not just winning the game, he's taking names for the reckoning to come. Yen stands in the middle of the room, looking completely overwhelmed as he clutches his clipboard. To him, the volume of these bribes is far too explicit, a physical manifestation of the court's greed. But Kalian is already focused on the Baron's offering. As Yen begins to sort through the chaos, he pulls out the first of the Baron's gifts. A brilliant, shimmering light fills the room, reflecting off the polished floor. It is a necklace, but not just any piece of jewelry. It is an incredibly ornate, ruby-encrusted masterpiece that sparkles with a blinding intensity. The gold links are heavy, and the central gemstone glows like a drop of dragon's blood. It is a gift fit for a king, or perhaps a very specific kind of treasure. Kalian stares at the glittering object, his expression unreadable. The sheer opulence of the piece is staggering, yet there is a strange silence that follows its reveal. The prince looks from the necklace to Yen, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He asks the question that is clearly weighing on his mind. Is the Baron actually giving this to him to wear? The thought of the stoic prince draped in such gaudy, sparkling rubies is almost comical. Yen coughs nervously, his eyes darting away from the prince's intense gaze. He admits that when the Baron asked what the prince liked, he might have mentioned how much Kalian treasures Raven. The realization hits Kalian like a physical blow. He looks back at the shimmering, ruby-studded chains and realizes the truth. This isn't a necklace for a human, it's a piece of high-end tack for his horse. He can't help but let out a dry, incredulous laugh. He never expected this level of literal interpretation. His horse, Raven, is about to receive a piece of jewelry more valuable than what most high-ranking nobles wear to a royal ball. It's a ridiculous situation, but beneath the humor, Kalian's sharp mind is already working. He knows the Baron isn't just being eccentric. This is a test. Kalian holds the heavy chains in his hand, watching the light dance across the rubies. He realizes the Baron is trying to verify his intentions. In the world of the court, accepting a gift of this magnitude creates an unspoken debt, a tether that the Baron could pull at any time. If Kalian simply accepts it, he's playing into the Baron's hands. He thinks of the Baron's smug face and the way he likely expects the prince to be grateful for the life-saving gesture. He would probably think of sending another present to thank me for saving his life, Kalian muses, his eyes narrowing. But Kalian doesn't do gratitude, he does business. He tells Yen to contact the Polun Emporium immediately. He doesn't want the gift, he wants to know the cost. He's going to buy it outright. By turning the bribe into a transaction, he severs the tether before the Baron can even tighten it. He looks down at the necklace one last time, a cold smirk playing on his lips. How could mere jewels be enough to pay for a prince's favor? He tells Yen to inform the Emporium that he likes the piece and intends to purchase it. Yen is stunned, wondering why the prince would spend his own funds when he could just take it for free. But Kalian isn't buying it because he's fascinated by the sparkle. He's buying it because it's a move on the board. However, his attention is quickly diverted to the second gift from the Baron. It is a strange, dark plant sitting in a simple pot. It looks almost monstrous, with thick, purple petals that resemble a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth. It is a stark contrast to the shimmering rubies, looking more like something pulled from a nightmare than a royal garden. Yen leans in, reading the documentation that came with the strange flora. It turns out this isn't from the Baron's personal collection, but a gift from the Mage Association. According to the written explanation, it is a rare glow-in-the-dark flower. But there's a catch, it only reveals its true beauty after it dies. When the plant withers, it releases a unique, shimmering pollen that illuminates the darkness. It's a gift for enthusiasts, something precious and rare. Kalian stares at the toothy, carnivorous-looking plant, and his smirk deepens into something far more sinister. He doesn't see a rare flower, he sees an opportunity. He tells Yen to leave the plant where it is. He has a very fun idea, and it involves a bit of calculated theater. Later that morning, the quiet of the prince's chambers is shattered by a violent crash. A maid, likely Sela, freezes in horror as the sound of breaking porcelain echoes through the hall. She rushes toward the source of the noise, her voice high and frantic as she screams for the prince. Inside, the scene is one of domestic disaster. A teapot has toppled over, its contents soaking into the expensive rug. Shards of a broken cup lie scattered across the floor. Colleen stands over the mess, looking remarkably unbothered. He holds his hands out, claiming that his hands simply slipped. He looks at the maid with a mask of mild regret, noting that he spilled all of his morning tea. But the tea didn't just hit the rug. It drenched the strange, toothy plant from the Mage Association. The maid is in a panic, her eyes wide as she looks at the soaked gift. She knows how precious it was supposed to be and worries that the prince has ruined a royal tribute. But Colleen just tells her to clean it up and leave the pot exactly where it is. He watches as the dark liquid seeps into the soil of the carnivorous plant. To the maid, it's an accident. To Colleen, it's a masterstroke. It's not like there's poison in the morning tea or anything, he thinks, his eyes flashing with a dark, hidden knowledge. The plant begins to wilt almost instantly, its purple petals curdling and turning black. He has used the very poison meant for his own assassination to kill the plant, creating a perfect, untraceable piece of evidence that he can use later. He quite likes the result. As night falls over the capital, the narrative shifts away from the palace walls. Two figures on horseback gallop through the cobblestone streets, their cloaks billowing in the wind. It is Colleen and his master, the High Mage Alan Manasil. They are moving with purpose, leaving the viper's nest of the palace behind for the relative freedom of the city. Alan looks over at his student, a look of genuine appreciation on his face. He thanks Colleen for remembering to help the association, but his voice carries a hint of amusement. He knows the prince never does anything out of the goodness of his heart. It's all thanks to the request of a certain prince who insisted on bringing poison along with the antidote, Alan muses. He realizes now that Colleen's accident with the tea was a calculated move to test the very toxins they had discussed. Colleen looks at his master, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his usual cold exterior. He asks how he could possibly forget such an important detail. Being outside the palace walls seems to have changed him. The heavy weight of the crown and the constant threat of assassination seem to lift in the cool night air. Alan notices the change immediately. He remarks that Colleen seems much happier now than when he was trapped within the gilded cage of the royal residence. Colleen laughs, a sound that is light and free of the usual sarcasm. Why wouldn't he be? He's been waiting for this outing for the longest time. He almost let slip that it's the first time he's felt truly alive in this new life, but he catches himself, keeping his secrets close. They continue their ride, the sound of horse hooves rhythmic against the stone. Alan watches the prince, realizing that his student is far more dangerous and capable than anyone in the palace realizes. He's probably only receiving the report around this time, Colleen says, referring to the king. He knows that the news of the poisoned plant will be reaching the monarch's ears shortly, throwing the court into a new cycle of suspicion and fear. Alan shakes his head, a small smile on his lips. Like master, like student, he thinks. He asks Colleen if he properly took the medicine he gave him the day before. Colleen confirms that he did, noting that his body feels much lighter. The antidote has done its work, clearing the lingering effects of the palace's slow-acting treachery. As they reach a quiet intersection, Colleen's expression turns serious once more. He mentions that the person who served him the poison tea was obviously nervous. He didn't just survive the attempt, he observed it, analyzed it, and turned it into a weapon. I planted an interesting seed, so we'll slowly be able to see what grows, he says, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. He's no longer just reacting to his enemies, he's orchestrating their downfall. Alan looks at the wilting plant in his mind's eye and realizes that Colleen has already won this round. Since my student is so talented, there's nothing left for me to do, the mage jokes. He asks if the prince even needs him anymore. Colleen looks at his master with a look of sincere respect. Of course I do, he replies. They have reached the point where they must part ways for the night. Colleen has his own business to attend to, a solo mission that requires the cover of darkness. He thanks Alan for his understanding and for the valuable way that gift is being used. Alan turns his horse toward Tynancia Street, where the Mage Association is located. He tells Colleen to come find him when he's finished with his errands. Colleen watches him go, his silhouette disappearing into the misty night. See you soon, master, he whispers. The game is far from over, but for the first time, Prince Colleen is the one holding all the other players should fear. Alan Manasil turns his horse toward Tynancia Street, his silhouette fading into the misty night. Colleen watches him go, a rare moment of quiet settling over him. Yes, see you soon, master, he whispers, the words hanging in the cool air. The High Mage is heading to the association, leaving Colleen to handle his own private affairs. They agree to meet again once they've both finished their respective business. Colleen remains still for a moment, the rhythmic sound of Alan's horse fading into the distance. He is finally alone in the heart of the capital, away from the prying eyes of the palace vipers. He turns his horse, moving with a calculated purpose through the darkening streets. The city is alive with shadows, but Kalyan moves through them like he belongs there. He has a destination in mind, a place where the secrets of two kingdoms intersect. The title card flashes, reborn as the enemy prince. The scene shifts to the searing heat of a blacksmith's forge. A heavy hammer falls with a deafening crash. Tang! Sparks erupt like dying stars, illuminating the cramped, soot-stained workshop. The blacksmith swings again, his muscles bulging as he shapes glowing metal into a lethal edge. Tang! The sound is rhythmic, a heartbeat of industry in the dead of night. Kalyan stands in the corner, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the furnace. He isn't here for a masterpiece, he's here for a tool. The hammer falls one last time, the metal cooling into a sharp, functional blade. Kalyan reaches out and takes the weapon, lifting it to the light. He stares at his own reflection in the polished steel, red eyes burning with a cold, ancient intelligence. He runs a thumb along the flat of the blade, testing its balance. Nice, he murmurs, a small, dangerous smirk playing on his lips. This is enough for me. It's a temporary measure, a custom order placed to fill a gap in his arsenal, but in his hands, even a simple dagger is a death sentence. He sheaths the blade and steps back out into the night. As he rides, his mind is a whirlwind of strategy. He's already put in an order for a custom sword, something more suited to his true capabilities, but for now, this will have to do. He wonders what's left on his checklist. Information. That is the true currency of this world. He thinks back to his homeland, Secretia. In order to spy on other nations, Secretia didn't just rely on diplomats or high-ranking nobles. They dispatched secret agents across the entire continent, weaving a web of shadows that spanned every border. These weren't just men in cloaks, they were ghosts. They surpassed the collection of regular information, operating in the dark for a long time. Look at the map of the continent. Every city, every village, every tavern is a potential node in this network. Look at the people in the streets. That maid carrying a tray of tea, that baker kneading dough, that laborer hauling crates. They are trained assassins. They were assembled by one man, Kalyan's father, King de Blanc of Secretia. A man who understood that a well-placed ear is more valuable than 1,000 swords. Kalyan knows this network because he was once its crown jewel. He knows the past Burin, the man he used to be, and the legacy he left behind. He stops his horse in a narrow alleyway, the sign above the door creaking in the wind. It reads, Nealangsha Carrier Pigeon Rental Shop. To any passerby, it's a simple service for sending messages across the kingdom. To Kalyan, it's a gateway to his past. He knows very well how cruel and dangerous these birds can be. He trained them himself, after all. He knows the codes, the hidden signals, and the price of failure. He adjusts his hood, pulling it low over his face. Above all, he has to remember his current reality. His identity right now is the Prince of Kairos. He is the enemy. He is the target. If the people inside this shop find out that one of their primary targets is standing in their base, they won't send him back in one piece. He takes a deep breath, his expression hardening. Then, a moment of dry humor strikes him. He catches his reflection in a window and can't help but roast his own appearance. This hair and these eyes, they stand out so much. He looks like a lighthouse in a storm. He needs to go around as quietly as possible, but his very genetics are working against his need for stealth. He pushes the door open, a small bell chiming to announce his arrival. The shop is filled with the sound of rustling feathers and soft cooing. Cages are stacked from floor to ceiling, each containing a bird that is more than it seems. Kalyan walks inside, his eyes scanning the room. It's bigger than it looks from the outside, a labyrinth of wood and wire. An old man stands behind the counter, his face a map of wrinkles, a single monocle perched over one sharp eye. He looks up as Kalyan approaches. Do you want a carrier pigeon? The man asks, his voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. Kalyan doesn't answer immediately. He walks toward a row of cages, noting the state of the birds. No, he says finally. He points to a pair of white pigeons huddled together. These birds don't seem to wake up from their sleep. The shopkeeper watches him closely, his gaze intensifying through the monocle. Kalyan continues, his voice low and knowing. It seems they've flown in from a faraway place. They seem quite fatigued. He's not talking about the distance, he's talking about the border. These birds have come from Secretia, carrying reports that could topple thrones. The shopkeeper remains silent, his hand moving slowly beneath the counter. Kalyan doesn't blink. He knows the man is reaching for a weapon. Why else would they sleep like that? Kalyan asks, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Since there's no better place to sleep for such an exhausted bird. He reaches out, his fingers hovering near the lock of a cage. The shopkeeper's eyes narrow. He realizes this isn't a regular customer. This is someone who knows the language of the trade. What did you come here to find, the man asks, the pretense of a simple shopkeeper vanishing. Colleen smirks. I need bird feed. It's a code, a demand for information. The shopkeeper's expression shifts to one of cold hostility. Ah, we do sell bird feed here. But, before he can finish, the air in the shop turns frigid. Callion's hand moves in a blur. The dagger he just bought flashes in the dim light, the blade singing as it clears the sheath. The shopkeeper reacts with surprising speed, his own hand coming up with a hidden knife. The two blades meet with a sharp metallic ring. The shopkeeper is stunned. He didn't expect a youth to have this kind of speed or precision. I don't remember selling any birds recently, the man growls, his grip tightening on his knife. He realizes now that Colleen is a threat, someone who shouldn't exist. He's not your regular person, for sure. Colleen doesn't back down. He leans into the man's space, the killing intent radiating off him in waves that he explains the reality of the situation. Here, birds represent secret agents who are collecting information. Secretia even keeps the identities of these agents hidden from each other. This is so that in the event of an agent being caught, the information wouldn't lead back to the homeland. It's a perfect system of plausible deniability. Colleen looks the man dead in the eye, his red gaze piercing through the shopkeeper's defenses. Which means, Colleen says, his voice a low, terrifying growl, no one knows who you are, and no one will come looking for you if you disappear. He presses the blade closer to the man's throat. So, whose bird are you? The shopkeeper stammers, his confidence completely shattered. He looks at the quill and parchment on the counter. Colleen takes the quill and begins to write. He doesn't sign his own name. He writes a name that carries the weight of a kingdom, the blank. He looks at the man one last time, a dark, triumphant smile on his face. He's going to pretend to be a secret agent of Secretia, using his father's own network to dismantle his enemies from within. He has decided to play a dangerous game. He will pretend to be a secret agent of Secretia, using his knowledge of his past life to dismantle his enemies from within. The name Nebulade hangs in the air like a silent threat, a title that carries the weight of 1,000 secrets. As he stares into the darkness, his red eyes glow with a cold, predatory light. He isn't just a prince anymore. He is a ghost haunting his own future. He murmurs to himself, I'm Nebulade's bird, a code that marks his entry into the underworld of espionage. He knows that if he plays this right, the vipers in the palace won't even see him coming. They wouldn't know that the boy they despise is actually the greatest threat to their existence. The shopkeeper watches him, his sharp eyes magnified behind a thick monocle, sensing the killing intent radiating off the youth. Callion's hand rests casually on the hilt of his sword, a silent promise of violence if things go south. He is no longer just a pawn. He is the player who will become the first prince of Kairos, even if he has to burn the kingdom down to do it. He leans over the counter, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper as he delivers the line that will change everything. Please provide some feed for this bird which has just left its nest. It's a demand for information, a signal that he is ready to use Secretia's own network to steal Kairos' most guarded secrets. The title card flashes, reborn as the enemy prince. Chapter 19 begins with the heavy sound of a door creaking open, leading Colleen into the belly of the beast. The shopkeeper, a man who looks like he's seen 100 empires rise and fall, gestures toward a dark, narrow staircase. Follow me, he grunts, his voice like grinding stones. Colleen follows, his eyes scanning every corner of the descent. He realizes with a start that there was a hidden space like this right under everyone's noses, a labyrinth of secrets buried beneath the mundane streets. They reach a room filled with the scent of old parchment and dust. The shopkeeper turns, his expression unreadable. You must be a new recruit, so memorize my name since we'll be meeting from now on. I'm White Eagle. He looks Colleen up and down, assigning him a designation that feels like a brand. Red Swan. Colleen doesn't flinch. He accepts the name with a sharp nod. Okay, Red Swan, the old man repeats, testing the weight of it. The air in the library is thick with the tension of two predators sizing each other up. White Eagle moves behind a desk, his movements practiced and slow. What feed do you need? He asks, getting straight to the business of information. Colleen doesn't waste time with pleasantries. He lays out his request, one specific item and one piece of critical information. The shopkeeper doesn't even blink before naming his price. 8 plorin. Advance payment. Colleen's eyes narrow. 8 plorin. That's a small fortune for a single lead. He thinks to himself, he's giving me a price before I even tell him what item and information I'm looking for. It feels like a trap, a test of his resolve, or perhaps just a blatant attempt at highway robbery. He wonders if the old man is trying to trick him on purpose, hoping to make him let down his guard. But White Eagle just shrugs, his face a mask of indifference. It's a fixed price, he says, as if he's selling bread instead of state secrets. Colleen sighs, reaching into his pouch and producing the coins. He slides them across the table, the metallic clink echoing in the silent room. Okay, here, the item and info. White Eagle sweeps the coins away and reaches under the desk, producing a small, heavy bag and a weathered scroll. "Here is the feed you wanted," he says, sliding them toward Kalyan. Kalyan unfurls the scroll, his eyes darting across the text. Is this really correct?" he asks, his voice tinged with skepticism. The shopkeeper nods firmly. "Based on the size of the space you requested, that's the only place." Kalyan rolls the parchment back up, a dark plan already forming in his mind. "Thanks. This is helpful." As he turns to leave, White Eagle offers one final, ominous piece of advice: be careful. As Kalyan disappears back up the stairs, the shopkeeper watches the door with a look of grim fascination. "It's a cruel place," he mutters to himself, referring to the world Kalyan is about to enter. Kalyan's voice drifts back down, cold and certain, of course. He knows better than anyone that the world of shadows has no room for mercy. No matter how cruel that place is, he has already survived worse. But as White Eagle stands alone in the library, he hides a sharp dagger behind his back, his eyes reflecting a sudden, violent thought. "White Eagle, could it be more dangerous than you?" He realizes that this Red Swan isn't just a recruit, he's a monster in the making. Meanwhile, Kalyan is back on his horse, riding through the misty, blue-tinted streets of the capital. The city is quiet, but the air feels heavy with the weight of the night. He sees a group of figures in long, dark cloaks gathered near a bridge, their silhouettes ghostly in the moonlight. He wonders what could be happening in the middle of the night to bring so many people out. He tries to keep a low profile, knowing it's not good to attract attention when he's carrying stolen intelligence. According to his map, he needs to cross that bridge to reach his next destination, so he spurs his horse forward, hoping to pass quickly. Suddenly, a figure steps out, blocking his path with startling speed. Kalyan pulls on the reins, his horse rearing back as he glares at the intruder. "To suddenly block my path, what's the meaning of this?" he demands, his hand hovering near his blade. The cloaked figure bows deeply, their voice soft and apologetic. "I apologize. The deceased is setting off on their final journey, so if this isn't urgent, please stop for a bit." Kalyan blinks, his anger fading into a strange, hollow curiosity. "The deceased?" he asks. The figure gestures toward the bridge, where a procession is moving with somber grace. "Ah, you're in the middle of a funeral ceremony." Kalyan looks at the mourners, their heads bowed in grief. He feels a sudden pang of respect for the dead, a feeling that feels out of place in his cold, calculated world. There's no need to intervene in the deceased's path. "I'll wait," he says, settling back into his saddle. The mourner bows again, a gesture of profound gratitude. "Thank you, so much." Kalyan watches them, his mind drifting to the customs of death. He knows that the ways of sending off the deceased are different in every nation, a reflection of how they value life. In Kairos, the tradition is poetic and haunting. While red flowers drift along the slow-moving river, the living are forbidden from crossing the bridge while the dead pass. There is a legend that if the living interfere, the deceased will lose their way to the afterlife, wandering forever in the mist. Kalyan finds the thought strangely beautiful, but his mind quickly jumps to his true homeland, Secretia. There, the customs are different. They place a very special flower named Sinistar atop the grave. It is a botanical marvel. In the day, it blooms as a pure white flower, but in the night, it transforms into a brilliant, glowing blue. The Sinistar flower implies that the two worlds, the living and the dead, will never meet, a custom meant to represent that they must finally part ways. As he watches the Kairos funeral, he can't help but wonder about his own death. He wonders if his brother ever placed a Sinistar atop his empty grave, or if time simply rewound before the flowers could even be planted. He looks at the glowing lanterns reflecting in the water, his expression turning somber. Maybe, he thinks, a rare moment of vulnerability crossing his face, I'm the deceased who has lost its way. He is a man out of time, a soul trapped in the wrong body, wandering through a world that shouldn't exist for him. The funeral leader approaches him, breaking his reverie. "Thank you for waiting. You can walk on the path now." Kalyan nods, clicking his tongue to signal his horse. He moves forward, the heavy thoughts of the dead sliding off him like rain. Well, regardless, he tells himself, his eyes hardening once more, I'm only Kairos' third prince now. There is a cold finality in his voice as he promises that they will go in peace, a prayer for a soul that sounds more like a sentence than a blessing. He wears a sharp, predatory smile, one that suggests he isn't just mourning the dead, but perhaps planning to join them in a very different capacity. Behind him, hidden in the shadows of the bridge, a figure with long, flowing blue hair watches his departure with intense, calculating eyes. Kalyan spurs his horse forward, the rhythmic clatter of hooves echoing against the stone as he crosses the bridge, unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to the fact that he is being hunted. The observer is Arson, the commander of Valkan, and his gaze never wavers from the prince's retreating back. His companion asks if he's even listening, but Arson is lost in thought, his mind racing to connect the boy he sees now with the legends he knows. He whispers that he will remember Kalyan, his voice carrying a weight of recognition that spans lifetimes. Suddenly, the scene shifts into the fractured light of a memory, a vision of the Prince of Secretia. It is a haunting image of a past life, where magic circles glow with a violent, ethereal light and a group of hooded figures stands in a ritualistic circle. In the center of this arcane storm, a white-haired figure, Kallian's true self, Burn, stands amidst an explosion of pure energy. A sword falls through the darkness, a symbol of a kingdom lost and a life cut short in a blaze of glory and betrayal. The light fades, returning to Arsen's narrowed eyes as he decides that despite the darkness he senses, Kallian seems like a good person. He pulls his hood tight, vanishing into the night as the prince continues his journey. Kallian rides through the misty streets, noticing that the capital has become a shrine to a name he knows all too well. Signs for Sisvanian's deep sleep, Sisvanian's rest, and Sisvanian's meal hang from every corner. It's as if the entire city is obsessed with his ancestor, or at least, obsessed with selling his name to the highest bidder. He reaches a tavern where the sign reads Sisvanian's deep scent of alcohol, and he can't help but think that this is all a bit much. He remembers the stories the secret agents told him back in his old life, realizing now that they weren't exaggerating. The capital is crawling with Sisvanian's followers. He dismounts and enters the establishment, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the bald shopkeeper. The man offers to lead him to an empty place for a private talk, but Kallian isn't interested in pleasantries. He delivers the code with a chilling grin, asking for the 4th floor of this building. The shopkeeper freezes, his eyes widening in genuine shock. This is a 2-story building, and the mention of a 4th floor is a secret known only to a select few. Kallian's smile widens, his red eyes gleaming with the knowledge that he has just bypassed the man's defenses. The bald man realizes he is dealing with someone far more dangerous than a mere noble, and he quickly agrees to lead the way. They move through the dimly lit tavern, passing patrons who are too drunk to notice the prince moving toward the back. The air grows heavy with the smell of stale ale and the muffled sounds of a distant, roaring crowd. They reach a wall lined with ornate brass coat hooks, and Kallian stops, his eyes scanning the mechanism. He recalls the specific instructions he bought from White Eagle, knowing that there was only one piece of information that truly mattered tonight. He reaches out and manipulates a specific hook, the metal clicking into place with a satisfying mechanical thud. Suddenly, the wall groans, and a hidden door swings inward, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that plunges into the earth. The code was simple: the 4th floor in a 2-story building doesn't exist above ground, it happens below. Kallian descends into the darkness, the sound of the crowd growing louder and more feral with every step. He isn't entering a simple gambling ring where trivial money changes hands, he is entering the belly of the beast. He peeks through a heavy wooden door, his eyes narrowing as he takes in the scene. The room is a cavernous arena, lit by flickering lamps and filled with the stench of sweat and blood. In the center, a brutal fight is underway. A man is being pummeled, his face a mask of agony as a massive fist connects with his jaw, sending a spray of blood across the floor. The crowd is a sea of frenzied faces, screaming for more violence, their voices blending into a single, bloodthirsty roar. This is the illegal gambling fighting ring, a place where lives are traded for coin and mercy is a foreign concept. The announcer's voice cuts through the din, declaring that the fight has come to an end. The crowd erupts, some cheering in triumph while others curse their luck, their anger boiling over as they scream for the loser to be killed. They shout tactical advice that comes far too late, telling the fallen man to duck or to get up, but he is beyond hearing them. He lies broken on the blood-stained floor, his chest heaving as he gasps for air through a shattered nose. The victor, a mountain of a man known as Bloody Gerard, stands over him, his fists still clenched and dripping with gore. He has won again, maintaining his streak of brutality while the gamblers scramble to settle their debts. A woman in a revealing red dress moves through the stands, preparing the dividend certificates for those who were smart enough to bet on the monster in the ring. The announcer's voice booms through the cavernous, dimly lit arena, his words cutting through the thick haze of smoke and sweat. He reminds the crowd that those who were smart enough to bet on the white side will soon receive their dividend certificates to exchange for cold, hard cash. A young woman with striking silver hair, bound in elegant buns and dressed in a deep crimson gown, moves gracefully through the stands. She carries a tray, her expression a mask of professional indifference as she weaves through a sea of desperate men. But the elegance of her movement is a sharp contrast to the brutality unfolding below. In the lower tiers, the atmosphere is feral. Gamblers lean over the railings, their faces contorted with a mixture of greed and bloodlust. They scream at the fallen fighter on the blood-stained floor, their voices a cacophony of hatred. "You bastard! Do you know how much I bet on you?" One man howls, his fists clenched in futile rage. Another simply roars, "Just die," with a chilling lack of empathy. To these people, a human life is worth exactly as much as the slip of paper in their hands. The floorboards are slick with dark, wet streaks where losers have been dragged away like discarded meat, leaving behind the never-ending smell of blood that permeates every corner of this hellhole. The crowd doesn't care about the tragedy, they only care about the result. They cheer for the victor, Bloody Gerard, praising his brutality as if it were a divine gift. As expected of Gerard, they shout, while others complain that he should have beaten his opponent even more. It's a scene of pure, unadulterated depravity. Kalyan stands in the midst of this madness, his features obscured by a heavy dark hood. His red eyes glow with a quiet, simmering fury as he takes in the spectacle. To him, this isn't entertainment, it's a erasure of everything that makes a person human. He thinks to himself that this scene, where all humanity is erased, is tremendously disgusting. He is a predator in a room full of scavengers, and he can barely stand the stench of their souls. His internal monologue is interrupted by a gruff, impatient voice. A man with a receding hairline and a sour expression barks at him, "Hey, you with the hood." He sticks out a hand, demanding the entrance fee with a flick of his fingers. Kalyan doesn't blink. He reaches into his cloak and produces the coin, his movements calm and deliberate. The man takes the money and gestures toward the back, shouting for a servant to take the newcomer to seat number 27. That's when the silver-haired girl in the red dress approaches him. She doesn't say a word. Instead, she reaches out and firmly grabs his sleeve, her touch light but insistent. She gestures for him to follow her, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. Kalyan follows, noting the strange silence that hangs around her. He wonders if she is unable to speak, but as they move into a patch of better light, he notices something that makes his blood run cold. As she turns her head, he sees the jagged, scarred tissue where her ears should be. They haven't just been injured, they have been brutally cut off. The realization hits him like a physical blow. This girl isn't a willing participant in this den of iniquity, she is a victim of unimaginable cruelty. He looks closer and sees the thin, metallic collar around her neck, a tracking device. It's a clear sign that she is a slave, kept here to serve the whims of the gamblers while being denied even the most basic dignity. How thorough, Kalyan muses bitterly, realizing that the management has ensured she can never escape this nightmare. The girl doesn't look for sympathy, though. She taps him on the shoulder and points toward a tray marked with his seat number. She's telling him to bet. She knows the rules of this place, and she knows that a man who doesn't bet is a man who doesn't belong. Kalyan decides to play along. He has a goal tonight, and to reach it, he must blend in with the monsters. He reaches into his pouch and pulls out 2 heavy gold coins, letting them fall onto the tray with a sharp, metallic ring. He thinks to himself that he has to play along until he gets exactly what he wants. The rules here are simple, designed to exploit the most basic human instincts. You bet your money, people fight, and if your chosen gladiator wins, you gain back twice the amount you placed. It's a cycle of greed that feeds on itself. 3 plorin becomes 6. 6 becomes 12. It's a siren song for the desperate, a way to turn a small stake into a fortune if you have the stomach for the violence. Kalyan, however, isn't just guessing. He's calculating. By the time the 10th match is over, the announcer screams that the winner is Iron Knee Pantilan. The crowd erupts, but the silver-haired girl is frozen in shock. She looks down at the tray in front of Kalyan, where a literal mountain of gold coins has accumulated. She has never seen anyone win like this. Kalyan sits there with a smug, predatory grin, his chin resting on his hand as he surveys his winnings. This is how 3 plorin becomes 1536 plorin. He has effectively broken the house, and the gamblers around him are starting to notice. They whisper and sweat, looking at the hooded stranger with a mixture of awe and terror. But Kalyan isn't finished. He isn't here for the money, he's here for a person. The announcer returns to the center of the ring, his voice reaching a fever pitch as he declares the start of the final match. This is a special bout with a 4 times dividend at stake, the ultimate prize for the ultimate gamble. He introduces the house champion, Bloodhammer Sean, a massive brute of a man who is led out in heavy iron chains. Sean is a mountain of scarred flesh and malice, a creature that looks more like a demon than a man. But then, the announcer introduces the challenger, the indefatigable boy. Kalyan stands up so quickly his hood almost falls back. His eyes widen as he stares at the figure entering the ring. There he is, he whispers, the words catching in his throat. In an instant, the present fades away, replaced by a haunting memory from his past life as Burn. He remembers being trapped in a place just like this, a dark hole where he was forced to fight for the amusement of others. He remembers a boy with silver hair and eyes that held a strange, defiant light. He remembers the boy's vow, "I don't want to become a knight. I want to become a sword. Your Highness sword, that is." Back in the reality of the arena, the boy stands before the massive Bloodhammer Sean. He is small, battered, and covered in the grime of the pits, but his stance is unwavering. The crowd mocks him, calling him monster-eyed because of the striking heterochromia of his pupils, one a piercing, icy blue and the other a ghostly, clouded gray. This is Kiri, the boy who would become the greatest weapon in the kingdom, now standing in a cage of